last memory of Leanne I have is when she was setting off to go shopping and she kissed me on the cheek and she laughed because she got lipstick on me again. And she was always doing that. And I sort of went, oh, and rubbed it off. And she walked out the back door. She just said, bye. And I said, bye back. And I said, don't be late for your dinner. And she was gone.
She was my best friend. She had like a gift, like a big sun, big sunshine.
Hello! Welcome to my talk show. It's Turkey.
There were times when we were feeling pretty much down that she may have been taken and killed, but we really couldn't let ourselves or allow ourselves to believe that. Every day when you don't know, you wake up and wonder, is she going to be coming home today?
On November 26, 2000, at exactly 3:36 p.m., a CCTV camera captured 15-year-old Sarah Whitehouse and her best friend, 16-year-old Leanne Tiernan, exiting a shopping center in Leeds. They were enjoying a day together as they did some early Christmas shopping. The girls caught a bus back to Bramley and parted ways. Shortly after, Sarah dialed Leanne's number, but she got no response. Eventually, Sarah called Leanne's mother, Sharon, and asked to speak to Leanne. Sharon told Sarah that Leanne wasn't home yet. She tried calling her daughter's number, but it kept ringing. Leanne never picked up. It was every mother's nightmare, their child going missing. Where was Leanne? What had happened to her? Welcome back to M7 Crime Storytime, where we cover solved, unsolved, and twisted cases from around the world. This case takes us across the pond to England. In West Leeds, West Yorkshire, is a little neighbourhood called Bramley. You can find it between Kirkstall and Stanningley. The region is a formal industrial sector with a lot of 19th century buildings and 20th century homes, including one of the last surviving bathhouses from the Edwardian era. The northern part of the area is crossed by the River Aire, a beautiful backdrop that visitors to Bramley Fall Park enjoy. Central roads and rails connected the town to nearby Bradford, and it's only 4 miles from the city centre of Leeds. An ideal place to raise a family. Or so the locals believed. Leanne Tiernan was born on September 27, 1984, to Michael Tiernan and Sharon Hawkhead in Bramley. The couple soon divorced, but Leanne maintained a healthy relationship with her father. Leanne and her elder sister Michelle lived in Leeds with their mum, while their father remained a familiar presence in both their lives. Leanne also loved spending time with her grandma and granddad, and every Sunday morning, she could be found walking with them to church. She also loved chocolate so much that an uncle nicknamed her Chocolate Chip Niece.
Hello! Welcome to my talk show. It's Turkey.
A fun-loving teenager, Leanne was a pupil of West Leeds High School and had been very busy studying for her GCSEs. A day out with her best friend, 15-year-old Sarah Whitehouse, was a welcome change of pace. The pair planned to go into Leeds for some early Christmas shopping. Sunday, November 26, 2000, started as a bright sunny day. After going to church with her grandmother, she returned home to get ready for her shopping trip with Sarah. Leanne wore a black and white ribbed polo neck jumper, black trousers, and a pair of black ankle boots. Over that, she pulled on her blue jacket. She tied her hair up in her favorite style, a French twist, gave her mum a kiss, and set out to meet up with Sarah. The two boarded a bus to downtown Leeds. By late afternoon, they were done shopping and were on the bus headed back home to Bramley. At around 4:50 p.m. that afternoon, the two friends got off the bus and made a short walk to Sarah's home before going their separate ways. Sarah watched Leanne walk towards Howley Gill. It was an unlit path in an area of wasted woodland, a shortcut that her mom had told her to never go through at night. But there was ample daylight, so Leanne felt safe taking the public footpath. It should have been just a 20-minute walk to her home. But when Sarah called Leanne's home to talk to her at 5:20 p.m., Sarah was surprised to find out that Leanne had not gotten back yet. Sharon immediately rang Leanne's cell phone to find out where she'd gotten to, but there was no response. She continued to try the number over and over again. At first, the phone rang several times before being turned off.
And it was actually Sarah wanting to speak to Leanne. So he says, oh, she's not back yet. So I phoned her mobile and it rang on about 20 times and it just cut off.
At 7 p.m. that evening, she called the local police department to report her daughter missing. That same night, the family went to the local church to get flashlights to search the area. Throughout the nights, shouts for Leanne were heard in the early hours of the morning. But there was no reply, and no Leanne. West Yorkshire Police, headed by Detective Superintendent Chris Gregg, sprang into action searching for the teenager. It was not an easy terrain to search. There were more than 700 houses, open areas, woodland, canals, drainage shafts, and wells. Many places to hide a teenager. They had their work cut out for them, but they were determined to bring Leanne home safe and sound. Helicopters flew overhead as uniformed officers and search dogs plowed the streets, going from house to house. The waste collection was stopped in the area to preserve any potential evidence. A week later, there was still no sign of Leanne. Investigators reconstructed Leanne's last movements with the help of her 19-year-old sister Michelle and best friend Sarah. Michelle wore the same clothes that Leanne had worn and stoically walked the same route that her sister had been taking when she disappeared.
I think we were clutching at straws, but we were kind of hoping that she had run away and nothing bad had happened, even though it was so out of character for her.
When it aired on the news, several people came forward and told investigators that they'd seen a man walking his black and tan dog in the Howley Gill area just an hour before she got off a bus on her journey home. A composite sketch was made and released. The man was described as 5'8", of stocky build, and with a round face that may be scarred. He was seen wearing a black woolen hat, 3/4-length waterproof jacket, and dirty jeans. Police released the information to the public. The calls came in fast. Every man who owned a dog became a suspect. In the end, 70 men who had dogs were identified, but they would all be eventually eliminated as suspects. With not much else to go on in the investigation, the case slowly went cold, but the public continued to rally behind the family, doing all that they could to keep Leanne's story at the forefront. A father of 3 from Leeds, Sean Clark, heard about the story and offered a £10,000 reward for information leading to the safe return of missing teenager Leanne Tiernan. Iceland Foods, a supermarket, printed Leanne's picture and details on milk cartons sold at its stores nationwide. Printed flyers and billboards appeared across the town with a picture of Leanne in her uniform with the words, "Have you seen me?" The police received several tips and possible sightings of her in towns as far away as Doncaster and Blackpool. But all tips and reported sightings led them no closer to her discovery. Leanne's parents continued to appear on the news as they made desperate, tearful pleas to the public, begging for any assistance that could help them find Leanne. It was a very dismal Christmas in the homes of everyone that knew and loved her. Her father put presents under the Christmas tree for his missing daughter. A Westlife CD Michelle had bought for Leanne remained unopened. Months went by in the search.
There were times when we were feeling pretty much down that she may have been taken and killed, but we really couldn't let ourselves or allow ourselves to believe that. Every day when you don't know, you wake up and wonder, is she going to be coming home today?
In the end, more than 2,000 houses, sheds, and outbuildings were searched in Leanne's neighborhood and along the route they believe she took on her way home from the shopping trip.
We had to calculate what we would have expected the route to be that she walked, and we call that the red route. The houses along that red route were searched, some 1,200 houses.
Police collected DNA samples from over 140 men in the area and executed search warrants at various locations throughout the city of Leeds. Yet they were no closer to learning the young girl's whereabouts. Her family and friends remained hopeful for her safe return. But on August 20th, 2001, 9 months after Leanne had vanished, a terrible find in the woods ended all chances of bringing the teenager home alive.
Telephone call from the police to say that they'd found her body in North Yorkshire.
On August 20th, 2001, as Leanne's classmates headed back to school to pick up their GCSE results, Mark Bisson was out walking his 2 dogs in Lindley Woods, a thickly wooded area just inside the North Yorkshire county border. where he stumbled across what looked like a trash pile. It turned out to be a floral duvet. He loosened the twine that held the duvet together and found what looked like the silhouette of a body wrapped in garbage bags.
I saw a sock, and I realised then that we'd actually found a body.
Police arrived and fully removed the duvet and 9 heavy-duty green garbage bags to reveal a fully clothed body.
I got the call in the afternoon, and I was told that a girl's body had been found at Lindley Woods. My immediate thoughts were, is this Leanne?
Its hands had been held to the back with 3 yellow cable ties. The leather dog collar secured tightly around the neck was loosened, and investigators pulled away the black garbage bag over its head to find the decomposing face of a young woman.
At the time when they first found out, they couldn't really tell us exactly how she died, but they said that it looked like strangulation.
This was not the first time a body had been found in that location. Back in 1992, the body of Yvonne Fitt had been found in the same area. Her killer had never been caught. The detectives hoped this case would not end out the same way. Using fingerprints, they were able to identify the body as that of the missing teenager, Leanne Tiernan. An autopsy would reveal that she'd been strangled to death with a plastic cable tie. The missing person search had just escalated to murder. Authorities were confident that the murderer was a local. For one, Leanne's body was found about 16 miles from where she was last seen. Also, the yellow cable ties that were used to bind her hands had come from the British postal system and were used by the Royal Mail or Parcel Force. Finally, the green garbage bags that Leanne had been wrapped in came from Morrison's, a well-known grocery store chain, 2 of which were in the area. DNA samples were collected from family members, friends, and known sex offenders from the area, as they hoped that they might find a match. They also conducted a fingertip search in the dense woodland area where Leanne's body had been buried, and expanded this to cover an area of over 20,000 square meters. On September 28th, the day after what should have been Leanne's 17th birthday, she was buried. Sanford Methodist Church in Bramley, Leeds, the church where Leanne had been baptized as a newborn, was filled with hundreds of mourners. Many of them spilled out into the streets. To celebrate her life and upbeat spirit, they all wore vibrant colors. Leanne's mother, sister, and best friend were joined by other friends to carry the white coffin into the modest church. A floral tribute bearing the words, "Night, Night, Baby," was taken into the service to the song November Rain by the American rock band Guns N' Roses. The congregation sang all the teenagers' favorite hymns, including "Give Me Oil in My Lamp" and "Ye Shall Go Out with Joy."
Sort of imagine her, how she used to look when she was curled up in bed. But she was always cold. I always had to go in and rub her back when she went to bed to warm her up a bit. It just sort of, I don't know, just something that keeps you a little bit closer to her. She was lovely. For my little baby.
In the crowd was Detective Superintendent Chris Gregg. He'd led the search for Leanne and had hoped to reunite her with her family. As he watched the coffin taken to the nearby Hilltop Cemetery where she would be laid to rest, his resolve to find who had killed her and bring them to justice grew stronger than ever. Investigators were still stumped about where Leanne's body had been found. It was an area that had been searched rigorously. Her body also didn't show the signs of a 9-month decomposition. Her hair was still pulled in the same ponytail with the same hair tie and hair clips as when she'd gone missing. After conducting a test on samples of her cardiac tissue, the medical examiner concluded that she'd been killed on the day she was kidnapped, and her body had been kept in cold storage for months. A few weeks before she was found at the dump, the killer had attempted to dispose of her body by leaving her in a common dump area, shrouded in the duvet. The killer likely hoped that her body would be taken to the dump. He was wrong. The best part was that he'd hidden the body so well that a ton of forensic data and DNA had been retained. Authorities hoped for a swift break that would enable them to find the murderer. Their hope was dashed when results came back that no DNA had been found on her body. They decided to investigate the items that were found on Leanne. Investigators found dog hair on Leanne's clothes. They figured they could get a DNA profile developed for the pet and identify a killer. The hares were sent to a university in Texas that had developed a DNA profiling technique for pedigreed pets. The university was only able to develop a partial profile for a dog's DNA. This was the first time a dog's DNA profile was obtained in a British case, but with no dog to run it against, the result was shelved. The knitted scarf found around Leanne's neck was promising. It contained strands of human hair in the knot. These were submitted for DNA testing, and they managed to create a DNA profile from the minute amounts of DNA inside the hair shaft. Next, investigators turned to the dog collar that had been used to wrap the black bin liner around her neck. It was made by a Nottingham company called Armitage Leather Products. Investigators considered that if the killer had bought the collar from them, they could get his name or address. They contacted the company, which told them that it sold to 220 different wholesalers across Britain, and submitted their sales documents to the police. Investigators began the daunting task of contacting each of them, asking if they had recorded any sales to the Leeds area of West Yorkshire. They hit pay dirt at the 112th call. The company was called Pet Pajamas. They were a Liverpool-based mail-order company and had sold 3 of the Armitage leather dog collars in Leeds. The details of the 3 customers were sent to investigators, and they began to look into their backgrounds. One of them quickly came up as a suspect. His name was John Taylor, and he lived in Bramley, just a few minutes from where Leanne had last been seen.
Saw that from Bramley area in Leeds, some 3/4 of a mile away from where Leanne disappeared, was the name John Taylor.
This was not the first time his name had come up in the investigation. When Leanne's body had been discovered, witnesses had mentioned him as someone that was often in the woods with his dog. By the time they were to interview him, he had said that his dog had died long before Leanne's murder. Had Taylor killed the pet to destroy evidence? Who was John Taylor?
Can you tell me how often you visited Huffley Gill?
I won't have been down there for years.
Okay.
It's not somewhere I used to go, certainly not toward the dog affair.
On the outside, Taylor seemed like a normal guy. He was a 45-year-old man who worked as a parcel delivery driver for Parcel Force, a division of the Royal Mail. His only conviction was for stealing a suit when he was 15. He'd been married and the union produced 2 kids, a son born in 1981 and a daughter born in 1983. The 2 divorced in 1996. Taylor lived what looked like a quiet life alone in a terraced home in Cockshot Drive, Bramley, Leeds. Except for the fact that he enjoyed torturing the animals he hunted, his neighbors thought he was an ordinary bloke. Taylor would catch and torture rabbits. He'd been seen stabbing a fox repeatedly. While out poaching, he had enjoyed clubbing pheasants to death. In 1982, shortly after they'd moved to their new home on Cockshot Drive, Taylor began to buy and breed dogs and ferrets. Janet had always been proud of their home, but the smell of animal dung began to take its toll on the marriage. She tolerated it till, one day, he brought 2 large owls into the home. They lived on a steady diet of day-old chicks that he bought in the thousands and kept stored in one of the large freezers he had on the property. Janet filed for divorce. Taylor traveled all over the country a lot, but not for work. He'd place advertisements for female companions and would often travel across the country to have sex. He was also an avid user of Lonely Hearts advertisements. Through his phone records, investigators began to track down a number of these women for interviews. Most of them described him as harmless, but some admitted that they'd called the police to report him as a suspect after Leanne's body was found and details of her murder came out. 2, in particular, painted the picture of a man who enjoyed violence when they were intimate. He'd even told one woman he'd like to have intimate relations with her daughter. Another former girlfriend eventually broke up with Taylor because of his bondage fetish. Taylor would bind her hands with cable ties and put scarves over her face. When investigators asked her to describe how Taylor tied her, she said he kept a bundle of cable ties in a drawer next to his bed. He'd put a plastic cable tie around each of her wrists, then secure both their hands behind her back by using a 3rd cable tie to link them. It was uncannily similar to how Leanne was discovered, and the information had also never been released to the public. 10 months after Leanne disappeared, Taylor was arrested and taken in for questioning. A warrant was served for his DNA and a search of his property. Police immediately sealed off his house in Cockshot Drive, putting up 7-foot-high wooden screens, and began a thorough search of the property. In the backyard, they found a hedge plant, a plum tree, and a poplar tree. Pollen consistent with these plants had been found on Leanne's hair, skin, and along her nasal tract. She had been there before she was killed. When they dug up the garden, they unearthed carcasses of various animals: 28 ferrets in a mass grave, and the skeletons of 4 dogs. One, a tan and black terrier, had a crushed skull. Could Taylor have killed his dog to hide his identity when he learned the police were looking for a man with a dog? The hairs from the terrier were tested and came back as a match to the hairs that were found on Leanne's body. In the house, the carpet had been stripped away. But on closer inspection, investigators found some pink carpet fibers caught on nails in the floorboards. These fibers turned out to be an exact match to the ones found on Leanne's body. They also found Leanne's blood under the floorboards of the house. The twine that had been used to tie the green bin liners around Leanne's body was traced to a manufacturer in Devon. They told investigators that they'd produced a small one-off batch that was used to make nets for catching rabbits. The batch found in Taylor's home was an exact match to the twine used on Leanne's body. They also found a large number of yellow zip ties in his house. Unlike the regular zip ties, the yellow ones are produced by an Italian company for the Royal Mail. Taylor, who worked for Parcel Force, a division of Royal Mail, could easily get his hands on them. The police also found the same type of garbage bag wrapped around a nail in John's kitchen. There were also 3 huge freezers on the property. At first, Taylor denied knowing Leanne or doing anything to her. When investigators confronted him with all the evidence they'd gathered, he admitted that he had abducted Leanne, but claimed her death was an accident. According to Taylor, after he got her into the house, there'd been a struggle and Leanne had fallen, hitting her head in the process. She died instantly, but there was no evidence of a fall. Taylor also couldn't explain why Leanne had been strangled or her hands bound with the cable ties. Investigators were finally able to get a clear picture of what had happened to Leanne that night. Leanne was in the wrong place at the wrong time. When she walked alone along the unlit path of Howley Gill, Taylor grabbed her from behind. Whilst there were no eyewitnesses, it was later reported that someone had heard a stifled scream. Taylor put his hand over her mouth, blindfolded her with a scarf, wrapped a coat around her, and marched her to his house 22 minutes away. There he tied her hands behind her back and sat her in an old church pew in his kitchen. He strangled her with a zip tie and a woolen scarf. Then he kept her body in a freezer in his kitchen for months. Shortly before Leanne's body was found, his friends reported that an upright freezer in his kitchen had suddenly disappeared. Investigators speculated that it had broken down, and Taylor decided to get rid of Leanne's body, a fateful decision that led to his arrest. On February 15, 2002, 46-year-old John Taylor was found guilty of murder and kidnapping Leanne. He was sentenced to 2 life terms. He'll serve 20 years before being considered for parole. Investigators had always considered that Leanne's murder was not Taylor's first crime. The way he hid and disposed of the body was too calculated. They were right. Once police had Taylor's DNA profile on the database, 2 assault cases that had been in the system were linked to him. The first assault occurred on October 18, 1988, when Taylor, armed with a mask and knife, attacked a 32-year-old woman as she walked across Howley Gill to pick up her kids from school. The second took place on March 1, 1989. Taylor, wearing a mask and carrying a knife, burst into the Bramley house of a 21-year-old mother. He dragged her into her bedroom and he attacked her, as her 18-month-old daughter cried in the next room. Taylor received 2 extra terms. In the following years, police did a cold case review of crimes across the country that were similar to Leanne's. In 2018, the extent of Taylor's depraved offending came to light when he admitted to another series of vile acts on 5 women between 1977 and 1996. In another incident, he held a knife to the throat of a pregnant woman in 1977, just before Christmas, he assaulted a barmaid. Taylor pleaded guilty to these attacks and received a whole life sentence. John Taylor will not see the outside of his prison walls for the rest of his life. He's serving his sentence at the maximum security Wakefield Prison, also known as Monster Mansion. It's home to many infamous felons who have committed horrific crimes.
It's not very nice sitting there knowing that somebody's actually done this to your child. I do feel a kind of connection with families that are actually in the position that I was in before they actually caught John Taylor. The fact that I actually know who killed Leanne didn't make things any easier for me. But then again, I suppose if I didn't know, I would be wanting to know.
Taylor has been named a suspect in nearly 10 reopened cold case murder investigations. The murder of 33-year-old Yvonne Fitt, who was found in a shallow grave just 100 yards from where Leanne's body was dumped in 1992. 13-year-old Lindsay Reimer, who vanished after leaving home to run an errand. She lived less than 20 miles from Taylor's home in Bramley. Her body was found 5 months later in a canal. Deborah Woods, who was found on fire at a Leeds railway station. She was found wrapped in bin bags and bedding after being kept in cold storage. Rebecca Hall, a prostitute who was found dead in Bradford, and many more. There are still many questions about just how many more murders and assaults Taylor might have gotten away with, and just how far back he might have started. How did he evade capture for so long? For 3 decades, the murder of Timothy Coggins left both his family and community in the grips of fear and uncertainty. On October 9, 1983, hunters discovered his body next to a giant oak tree in an open field. It was obvious to investigators that he'd been murdered. Despite promising leads and the discovery of possible suspects, the investigation came to a screeching halt. The Coggins family suffered in silence until a new team of investigators took it upon themselves to find justice for Timothy. But little did any of them realize just how deep the festering wound of corruption truly ran. Spalding County is part of the west central portion of Georgia. It has a little bit of everything: small-town charm, natural beauty, and vibrant culture. Home to beautiful lakes, acres of scenic parks, and several historical landmarks, Spalding County welcomes each and everyone to its doorstep. However, in the 1980s, life was much different. There was a stark divide between the white and black community, and racial tensions ran high. This was compounded by the fact that the infamous Ku Klux Klan, a white supremacist and terrorism group, operated one of their chapters within the community. So, when the beaten body of a young black man was found in Spalding County, it led investigators down a treacherous path that would reopen old wounds. Sunday, October 9th, 1983, was a crisp fall morning. A group of squirrel hunters were making their way through an open field north of the city of Griffin, Georgia. Near a giant oak tree, locally known as the Hanging Tree, the men stumbled upon the body of a black man. It was clear the man had suffered horribly before dying. His face and head were badly beaten and disfigured, his body bruised and bloody. The hunters hurried to contact the authorities. Officers from the Spalding County Sheriff's Department arrived with haste to the horrific crime scene. There, they found the man exactly as described by the hunters. He was partially clothed, with his shirt missing and his pants and underwear pulled down to his knees. There appeared to be a large X carved into his abdomen. While surveying the scene, officers noted tire tracks throughout the field. Within the grid formed by the tracks, they found a bloodied sweater turned inside out. In several areas around the tire tracks, they noticed patches of blood. Officers surmised that the victim had been dragged behind a vehicle before being left for dead. There was no murder weapon found at the scene. What they did recover was an empty Jack Daniel's whiskey bottle and a wooden table leg wrapped in black insulation tape. The bottle, table leg, sweater, and samples of sand were taken into evidence. The body was transported to the coroner's office for further examination. The examiner revealed that the victim was stabbed 7 times in the back and once behind his knee in order to disable him. Defensive wounds were visible on both of his arms, and he was severely bludgeoned in the head by a blunt object, possibly the table leg found at the scene. There were 2 large X's carved into his abdomen and back, which was later revealed to represent the Confederate flag. The examiner determined that the victim died approximately 36 hours before he was found, possibly on Friday, October 7, 1983. It was found that he had died not from any one specific injury, but rather from blood loss as a result of his cumulative injuries. The severity of his injuries made it difficult for the examiners to identify him. He was estimated to be between his early to mid-20s, about 5 feet 7 inches tall, and had a small tattoo on his hand. Meanwhile, investigators looked through recent missing persons reports and found nothing that matched their victim. With few leads, sheriff's officers turned to patrolman Oscar Jordan to help with the investigation. Jordan had been one of the few black officers in Spalding County. They believed that Jordan could help with the investigation by becoming a liaison between the predominantly white police force and the black community. Officers needed Jordan to establish a connection as racial tensions created mistrust between law enforcement and the black community. Over the next 2 days, Jordan went door to door asking anyone if they recognized the victim from the autopsy photo. It was difficult for people to put a face to the man, as he'd been severely beaten and disfigured. He had all but given up until he reached the Coggins Dorsey home in Griffin, Georgia. There, he spoke to a young woman named Talisa Coggins. At first, she didn't recognize the badly beaten man in the photo, but on closer inspection, she saw the small tattoo on his hand and told Officer Jordan that the man was her older brother, 23-year-old Timothy Coggins. Timothy Wayne Coggins was born on October 29, 1960, in Griffin, Georgia. He was the 4th of 8 children, 3 brothers and 4 sisters raised by his mother, Viola, and stepfather, Robert Dorsey. His niece described him as charming, charismatic, and playful, with a bright smile that showcased his beautiful, pearly white teeth. He was well loved in his Griffin community and worked doing odd jobs in and around the area as a handyman. Timothy was not quick to anger and enjoyed the lighter side of life. He shared a close bond with his younger sister, Talisa Coggins, as she was only 2 years younger than him. Timothy took the time to teach his sister how to ride a bike and get around town on her own. He was known for being outgoing and enjoyed a good party with old friends and new ones he'd make along the way. Timothy was also known to be a charmer, particularly around women, and attracted much attention. Timothy was the type of person who never met a stranger. He counted everyone as a friend, new or old. Jordan knew he had to start from the very beginning and interviewed Talisa about the last day she saw Timothy alive. According to Talisa, she and Timothy went out that Friday, October 7, 1983, to a club called People's Choice in Griffin, Georgia. It was a popular hangout for the young black crowd, and with a fully stocked bar and hot barbecue for sale, it attracted a steady stream of patrons. Not only was Timothy a regular at the club, but he also helped out with odd jobs for the owner, who was a good friend. In recent weeks, though, Timothy had been causing quite a stir. People's Choice was almost exclusively for black clubgoers, but Timothy had been swaying to the music with a young white woman. Though many would not bat an eyelid at the sight these days, in 1980s Georgia, it was gossip fuel. The racial divide was strong, with regular rallies and parades being held by Spalding County's local chapter of the Ku Klux Klan. When friends warned Timothy that his fraternizing with the young white woman would cause problems, he allegedly told them there was no way a white man would enter the club. Talisa told Officer Jordan that on that last Friday she saw her brother. She'd overheard a few people saying that 2 white men were waiting for Timothy outside as she made her way to the bathroom. When she came out, she saw her brother again on the dance floor. This time, though, he was not dancing. Instead, he followed a white man out of the club. she never saw him alive again. Jordan asked Talisa why no one had come forward to report Timothy missing. She explained that Timothy regularly disappeared from home for a few days after the weekend. He knew everyone in town and often stayed over with friends. They assumed he was safe somewhere, crashing on someone's couch. That was until officers showed up 2 days later, questioning people about the victim of a gruesome murder. Working with the information given by Talisa, Jordan and other sheriff's officers questioned witnesses from the club who backed up what Talisa had told them. From this, they learned that Timothy left the club with a woman and 2 white men. But no one knew who they were or where they'd gone after that night. The heat of the investigation fizzled slowly, but Officer Jordan kept his ear to the ground for more leads. Losing Timothy was only the beginning of the Coggins family's nightmare. During the investigation, they were constantly harassed by unknown individuals. One of the first incidents was when Timothy's stepfather, Robert, received an anonymous call telling him more family members would be killed if the investigation wasn't dropped. Robert also found a bloody t-shirt in the school bus he was driving, seemingly mocking the evidence found at the crime scene. One night while the family were together watching television, a brick was thrown through the living room window. Scrawled on the brick were the words, "You're next." The next incident terrified them even more. A decapitated black dog was left on the porch of the family home with another note that read, "You're next." Timothy was eventually laid to rest at the Fuller Chapel United Methodist Church Cemetery. However, his family did not put a headstone on his grave, fearing the marker would be desecrated. Fear grew as the family pondered who could be harassing them. Was it the murderers or others who had rallied behind those responsible for Timothy's death? Months after the murder of Timothy Coggins, Officer Oscar Jordan was still on the case and began hearing rumors of a possible motive for the murder. According to a few leads, Timothy had taken about $600 from a couple of white men in exchange for marijuana, but he never delivered on the drugs and was running scared, fearing they might be after him. Jordan then received another tip about paying a visit to Carey's mobile home park in Sunnyside, near where Timothy's body was discovered. The tipster revealed that there was a man bragging about knowing what had happened to Timothy Coggins. At the trailer park, Jordan met with a woman named Sandra Bunn. Sandra alleged that, on the night Timothy was murdered, she saw him at the trailer park along with 3 other people: her brother Frankie Gebhardt, his girlfriend Mickey Guy, and Frankie's brother-in-law Bill Moore Sr. She went on to tell Jordan that all 4 of them got into a pickup truck and drove in the direction of the hanging tree. Armed with this new information and the names of 3 possible suspects, Officer Oscar Jordan returned to the investigation team and presented his new theories. But as swiftly as he found the proverbial needle in the haystack, the case was taken away from him and reassigned to other investigators. Jordan was let go from the team and returned to patrol duty, while a new team looked into the murder of Timothy. Frankie Gebhardt was called in for questioning as investigators worked with the information gathered by Jordan. During his interview, Frankie provided them with a solid alibi. He was with his girlfriend Mickey Guy the entire night. They then called in Mickey, who confirmed Frankie's alibi. According to their statements, they'd never been to the club People's Choice, as it was an exclusively black establishment. They claimed never to have met Timothy Coggins or had any dealings with him in any way. From notes compiled by investigators, none of the witnesses could properly identify the individuals who were last seen with Timothy. Investigators failed to pursue the Bill Moore lead at all. Detectives searched Gebhardt's trailer and found no physical evidence to link him to the crime. According to investigators at the scene, none of the blood found matched either Gebhardt, Guy, or Moore's blood types. DNA testing was still in its infancy, and investigators, it seemed, had closed the investigation despite the glaring suspicion that someone was hiding something. Timothy's death became a footnote in the Spalding County Sheriff Department. The Coggins family continued to grieve, not knowing who to trust as the law failed them. They also feared being victimized by the very people who threatened them with violence after Timothy's death. They lived with this nightmare for over 30 years. Viola Coggins Dorsey, Timothy's mother, was shattered by her son's death and lived with the guilt and torment until her death in February 2016. However, weeks before her death, she made a startling statement. During her lucid moments, Viola would tell her daughter Talisa that the investigators were going to find Timothy's killers. Viola said she would not live to see the day, but she was sure someone was going to find her son's killers.
And even on her dying deathbed, she said she spoke of Tim's name. And so, she still wanted justice for her son, even on her deathbed 33 years later.
Talisa and her family had no expectations. After all these years, no one had contacted them regarding the case. But in a twist of fate, the Coggins family received a call from the district attorney's office in July 2017. They now knew who killed Timothy. In December 2016, Special Agent Jared Coleman received the long-abandoned case file of Timothy Coggins. Over the years, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation handled the major crimes from the more rural regions in the state. The agency cycled the unsolved cases among its agents every 6 months in hopes that a fresh set of eyes would be able to find a clue among the notes. Coleman, who was at the time in his second year at the agency, was struck by the lack of the investigation into Timothy's murder. It also struck him that no one seemed to care about looking into the case in recent years. With the determination to find justice for Timothy, Coleman dug into the file and discovered several pieces of evidence that could help him crack the 3-decade-old cold case. First, he looked at the interview with possible suspects Frankie Gebhardt, Mickey Guy, and Bill Moore Sr. The interviews with Gebhardt and Guy showed too many holes in their stories. The two only had each other for alibis and told the initial investigators they had no links to either Timothy or his subsequent death. To Coleman, the entire interview seemed lacking interest in delving deeper, and he made a note to recheck these people of interest. He also found that the third suspect, Moore, had been completely ignored in the investigation. A further look at the case file revealed a more recent development in the case that was completely overlooked. In 2007, the GBI received a letter from an inmate named Christopher Vaughn, who was serving time after being charged as a pedophile. In his letter, Vaughn alleged that he had information regarding the murder of Timothy Coggins. He was only 10 years old when he and other squirrel hunters discovered his body near the hanging tree in Sunnyside back in 1983. In the file, Coleman discovered interviews carried out by investigators with Vaughn. However, it seemed the investigators did not do much to follow up on the leads and left the case to grow cold again. Determined, Agent Coleman contacted the Spalding County Sheriff's Department and newly elected Sheriff Daryl Dix, who listened to Coleman's theories about the case and believed that, together, they could finally give the Coggins family the answers they needed. For Sheriff Dix, the case was also an opportunity to mend the relationship between the Black community and the Sheriff's Department, given the uneasy history between them. Dix assigned Sheriff's Deputy Mike Morris to Coleman, and together the men revisited the original crime scene.
That oak tree is referred to several times in interviews as the tree. It was a place where drug transactions occurred, parties, and Coggins' body was found on the power line.
A look at the area confirmed Coleman's gut feeling. Timothy's death was a lynching. He'd been tortured before being left to die in the open field. Sheriff Dix, meanwhile, began his own investigation and requested the evidence from the crime scene be brought out. Upon examining the evidence, Dix was frustrated to discover that most, if not all the evidence, had been lost. This included the whiskey bottle, the table leg, the bloody sweatshirt, and the tire track impressions from the crime scene. It was either a severe case of mishandling evidence or a serious cover-up by the original investigation team. Determined, Sheriff Dix began looking through cases related to hate crime and racism from the 1980s and discovered the journal of an undercover detective who was trying to infiltrate the Spalding County chapter of the Ku Klux Klan. The journal was dated back to 1982, a year before Timothy's murder. In his notes, the detective described his attempts to join the ranks of the Klan in order to discover the people behind the group. He was eventually inducted into the Klan and was told by one of the members that they had already inducted several high-ranking officials from the Spalding County Sheriff's Department and the Griffin Police Department. It was clear to Sheriff Dix the very people that were supposed to be helping solve the case were, in fact, sabotaging the investigation. It was time to go back and revisit the suspects and witnesses. Coleman and Dix had their theories, and on April 26, 2017, Coleman paid a visit to Christopher Vaughn in prison. Two familiar names kept popping up in Vaughn's testimony, Frankie Gebhard and Bill Moore. Vaughn explained that in 1983, he overheard Frankie Gebhard make a remark about killing a black man while attending a party. As Vaughn got older, Gebhard constantly brought up the murder of Timothy Coggins and bragged about killing him. Gebhard also confessed that he'd burned all the evidence linking him to the murder and tossed them down a well on his property. Vaughn was not done yet. He added that, on the night of Timothy's murder, he saw from his bedroom window the three suspects, Gebhard, Guy, and Moore, with the victim. He stated that he knew of a possible motive for Timothy's murder. According to Vaughn, Gebhard had been enraged when he discovered that his then-girlfriend, Mickey, had been having an affair. But it wasn't just the affair that had riled him up. It was the fact that she was having an affair with a black man. Upon hearing this, Coleman and his team of investigators believed that Mickey was the very same woman witnesses saw Timothy dancing with on that night. However, they were unable to confirm this because Mickey had moved away from Georgia weeks after the murder, and she'd passed away in 2010. Investigators didn't give up, though. Although Mickey was out of the picture, they still had two suspects on their list. First, they interviewed Bill Moore Sr. Moore vehemently denied knowing Timothy or being involved with his murder. Coleman knew that Moore was lying to them from the outset. They didn't press him any further, and instead turned their attention to Frankie Gebhard. Gebhard was already in custody at the Spalding County Detention Center. The 59-year-old Gebhard denied any knowledge of Timothy Coggins and even went as far as to claim he'd never heard of the case. Gebhard further denied bragging about the killing or disposing of evidence and challenged investigators to dig up the well if they so pleased. When Coleman showed Gebhard the picture of Timothy, he flew into a rage, spewing derogatory language and explaining that he'd never seen him before.
See right there, I'm 59 years old, I can't read, can't write, half-assed dumb. We're just trying to talk to you, sir.
The reason we're here is in 1983, there was a body found in North Spalding County. It was a black guy that was found. Do you remember the murder?
No, not really.
But that picture of that guy, though.
I ain't never saw that picture. I ain't never saw that. Okay.
Coleman did a bit of digging into Gebhard's past and discovered that he'd spent his entire life living at or near Carey's mobile home park in Sunnyside. He dropped out of school and took up work as a timber logger. On weekends, he and his brother-in-law, Bill Moore Sr., threw wild parties with drugs and alcohol flowing freely. The two men were considered inseparable by those who knew them, and both had a tendency for violence, often landing themselves at the local courthouse. It's alleged that they once butchered a cow on the kitchen floor of one of their trailers. Given their penchant for violence, linking them to the crime was not so far-fetched. And as Coleman soon discovered, many people were willing to talk once news spread that investigators were hot on the heels of Timothy's suspected killers. In July 2017, investigators made headlines by announcing the reopening of the Timothy Coggins case following new leads in the investigation. In an interview with reporters, Sheriff Daryl Dix warned the killers and their accomplices that they were coming for them. Over the next few months, between 60 to 70 witnesses came forward, with most, if not all, saying they'd been keeping the secret for almost 34 years. Some accounts varied, and investigators found that Gebhard allegedly told a few witnesses that he had intentionally told different people different stories to confuse the investigation. But a few key witnesses stood out. William Sadler, one of the men who was in the hunting group that discovered Timothy's body, stated that not only did Gebhard confess to murdering Timothy to him in person, but that he himself reported the confession to officers in 1983. However, nothing had ever come from it. Another witness named Shirley Sisk also came forward with a confession about Bill Moore Sr. She'd been a friend of Moore's late wife, Brenda, and told investigators that Brenda once allegedly told her that Moore planned to murder a boy and drag him behind his truck. An ex-girlfriend of Gebhardt's also came forward, claiming that she had endured years of abuse while they were dating, and he once threatened her that she too would end up like that black boy in the ditch. Another woman, who remained anonymous, came forward alleging both Gebhardt and Moore drunkenly admitted to the murder and lamented the good old days of killing black people for no reason. The investigation team received harsh backlash from family members of the accused as arrest warrants were issued for both men. They insisted that both men were being railroaded by the sheriff's department in an attempt to garner the support of the black community. 41-year-old Brandy Abercrombie, Moore's daughter and Gebhardt's niece, said they'd never heard of this case before. "We have no knowledge of this Timothy Coggins case. I've never heard of this case in my entire life," she told reporters. But for investigators, there was enough circumstantial evidence to bring the two men to justice. However, in a murder trial, much more was still needed to make it an airtight case.
I think it's horrible. It's sad that that would happen. It's interesting to know about the area. I hope they find who done it and justice is served. I really do.
The prosecution still needed evidence that could ultimately link these two men to the crime. Agent Coleman met with attorney Marie Broder and explained the lack of evidence due to mishandling within the sheriff's department. It frustrated the prosecution team because without the lack of proper physical evidence, the jury could turn in the other direction. It was then that Coleman remembered Christopher Vaughn telling him about the well on Gebhardt's property. The problem was, to excavate the well would mean destroying Gebhardt's home. Coleman and Broder shared a dogged determination for finding justice, and in time, they were able to find a hydrovac company in Atlanta that specialized in blasting water into wells and vacuuming up any debris left behind without causing damage to the property. It was worth a shot, and in August 2017, the investigation team were able to dredge up years of trash and a bounty of evidence. In the trash, they found a partially burned size 10 Adidas tennis shoe, similar to what Timothy's family said he usually wore when going out. Then they discovered a white t-shirt that was torn by what appeared to be several stab marks on the back. They already knew Timothy was stabbed 7 times in the back. They also found a thick chain, possibly used to tie and drag Timothy behind the vehicle. The last but most crucial piece of evidence was an old, broken knife. Timothy's sister, Talisa, voiced her concerns over the trial. She believed nothing was guaranteed until the final verdict was passed. Ain't nothing guaranteed. As a black woman, a black human being living in a racist town, you never know what's going to happen, she said.
I was asking the Lord to watch over my siblings. It was just like Tim's name just kept spitting out of my mouth. Talisa, Nina, Peggy, Jackie, Tyrone, Tim. And I kept saying, well, why am I doing this? I just kept saying Tim's name. And it was just like so weird to me. I said, well, Lord, bless him anyway. And I just felt like that's what God was trying to show me because I kept spitting his name out. And it felt good to know that they arrested somebody for Tim's murder.
But before the dust could settle on the new evidence discovered in the well on Gebhardt's property, there was yet another twist in an already sordid case. Following their interview with Gebhardt back in April 2017, investigators placed a wiretap on Gebhardt's calls made from the prison. This was done as they were not getting the information they needed from him willingly. They noticed he'd often called his sister Sandra Bunn. In the recordings, they discovered that Sandra advised Gebhardt against speaking with investigators and how to avoid being caught. She told him to avoid taking anything to drink or eat from investigators in case they were able to collect DNA from his discarded utensils. Sifting through these conversations, they discovered that Sandra had been following the advice of her son, Lamar Bunn, an officer with the Milner Police Department. What confused investigators was that Sandra had initially pointed out the connection between Timothy and Gebhardt, Guy, and Moore. Her intentions were never revealed, but investigators believed it was a show of arrogance that police would never be able to crack the case, despite the suspects staring them in the face. Shockingly, this was not the only twist in the case. There was yet another person who, it seemed, believed that Gebhard should have a fighting chance against the prosecution. A third person was discovered to be aiding Gebhard while in custody. A man named Gregory Huffman, who was a Spalding County Corrections officer, had been passing information about the investigation to Gebhard. These, investigators believed, helped keep Gebhard one step ahead of the investigation by providing him details he could use in court during his trial to his own advantage. This was more than enough for investigators and prosecutors to finally put an end to the enduring torture faced by the Coggins family. On October 13, 2017, the Spalding County Sheriff's Department and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation finally arrested Gebhard and Moore for the murder of Timothy Coggins. Sandra Bunn, Lamar Bunn, and Gregory Huffman were arrested for obstructing justice. Lamar was suspended, awaiting the outcome of his trial, while Huffman was fired. They were all detained at the Spalding County Detention Center. Now that investigators had all their suspects tucked away in jail, they began by recreating the events of the day leading up to Timothy's murder. Investigators believed that Timothy had gone to the People's Choice Club that Friday, October 7, 1983, and invited Mickey Guy along. From what they knew so far, Timothy and Mickey had been familiar with each other. Given the racial tensions in the county, their relationship may have sparked interest, and the story ultimately spread to Mickey's then-boyfriend, Gebhard. Upon hearing this, investigators believed that Gebhard and Moore drove to the club and started asking people about Timothy. People admitted to seeing Timothy with a white woman in the club and confessed that it wasn't the first time the two of them had been spotted together. It was a tense situation, and the story began to spread. Gebhard eventually made his way into the club and confronted both Timothy and Mickey. To avoid a confrontation and given his naturally easygoing manner, Timothy may have agreed to go talk it out with the men. All four made their way to the Cary Mobile Home Park, where Gebhard confronted both Mickey and Timothy about the accusations. They're unsure about what transpired next, but from witness statements, they gathered that the two men drove Timothy and Mickey out to the open field near the hanging tree, where they launched a sudden and brutal attack on Timothy by severing his tendons to disable him, and then stabbing him repeatedly in the back. While he was down, they then carved out 2 large X's on his back and abdomen. They then bludgeoned him with a table leg and chained him to the back of the pickup truck before dragging him around the field. Timothy was then left to die as the other 3 returned to Gebhard's home to dispose of the evidence. Investigators firmly believe that, given Gebhard's string of violence against women and his affiliation with racist groups, he may have been motivated by jealousy in finding Mickey not just in the arms of another man, but a black man. Gebhard and Moore were set to be tried separately for the crime, and in mid-January 2018, Gebhard's trial began. Prosecution Marie Broder began with a passionate opening statement and then walked the jury through the crime scene and the manner in which Timothy was so callously murdered. They relied on witness testimony, as DNA evidence was all but lost. The defense tried to poke holes in the prosecution's case.
This man makes admissions over the last 34 years and knows details about the crime scene that were never released. You'll hear that.
By pointing out the major number of witnesses were criminals themselves, and that the stories had each been different. Ultimately, another witness pointed out that, as he told investigators previously, Gebhard's aim was to tell different stories to different people to confuse the investigation. Another hole in Gebhard's defense was his inability to stop bragging about the murder. He'd inadvertently pointed investigators to where he'd hidden the evidence from the crime. Although no DNA could be found from the items recovered, the discovery backed up several witness claims. This included Christopher Vaughn's claim that Gebhard told him how he disposed of evidence in a well. In the end, the jury foreman said that it was Gebhard's own boasts that ultimately did him in. He revealed that they'd counted 17 times that Gebhard had admitted to the killing in some way or the other. On June 26, 2018, Gebhard was convicted of malice murder, felony murder, aggravated battery, aggravated assault, and concealing the death of another.
In the Superior Court of Spalding County, State of Georgia versus William Franklin Gebhardt, defendant, criminal action number 18R105A. Having considered whether the state has proven each element of the following offenses, we, the jury, unanimously find as follows. Count 1, malice murder, guilty. Count 2, felony murder, guilty. Count 3, aggravated battery, guilty. Count 4, aggravated assault, guilty. Count 5, concealing the death of another, guilty. Signed this 26th day of June 2018, signed by their foreperson.
He was sentenced to life in prison with an additional 30 years. In his sentencing, the judge said to Gebhardt, "Hopefully, sir, you have stabbed your last victim." He remains in prison at the Georgia Diagnostic and Classification State Prison in Butts County, Georgia. In August 2018, Bill Moore Sr. avoided trial by pleading guilty to concealing the death of another, as well as voluntary manslaughter. He received 20 years in prison, along with 10 more years of probation. Bill remained at the Augusta State Medical Prison until his death in October 2021. As for Sandra, her son Lamar, and Huffman, they each posted bail. Sandra and Lamar posted bail of about $700 each, and Huffman posted bail for $35,000. The latest report suggests that charges against all three have not yet been resolved, and there's not been any news on the whereabouts of the three individuals since 2018. Although the verdict will not return Timothy to them, the case has somehow been able to heal wounds that would have otherwise gone on to fester had the truth not been uncovered. During the trial, both families spoke on occasion, and after all was said and done, Bill Moore's daughter, Brandy Abercrombie, was overcome with emotion. She apologized to the Coggins family for her family's part in the death of their beloved brother and uncle. As she cried, Talisa Coggins wiped away Brandy's tears and forgave her for not understanding the enormity of the situation. Brandy, Talisa figured, would have been a little girl and have trouble believing her father and uncle could have committed such a crime. After all the stuff that Black people have endured, from slavery up until now, we still are a forgiving people, she said. The Coggins family has finally, after all these years, been able to place a headstone on Timothy's grave without fear of being attacked or having his grave desecrated by those who once victimized him. The inscription reads, "Gone, but never forgotten." Today's case highlights the social injustices faced by many from minority groups and social circles, not just in the United States, but the world over. It also shows that people who are witness to a crime have the power to speak out and make a difference. So, as the saying goes, if you see something, say something, and make sure you're heard.
He's sitting back there in that seat behind you, and I said, "Where are your parents?" He looks right back at me and he says, "I killed them both."
On June 10th, 2006, 24-year-old Lori Slesinski disappeared without a trace from Auburn, Alabama. This came after confirming that she would be attending a pre-planned girls' night out at her best friend and co-worker's house. At her trailer home, her dog was left unattended, the air conditioner on, and the telephone cord missing. What could explain her mysterious disappearance? Did Lori leave town in a hurry? Or was it something more sinister? Located in Lee County, Auburn is the largest city in eastern Alabama. It's also Alabama's fastest-growing metropolitan area and the 19th fastest-growing metro area in the United States since 1990. Unofficially nicknamed the loveliest village on the plains, Auburn is a melting pot for cultures with its southern hospitality. This historic college town is the home to Auburn University, one of the most recognized public universities in the nation. Today's story involves a former student of this university, Lori Slesinski. Lori Ann Slesinski was born to parents Casey and Arlene Slesinski on September 21, 1981. Gifted with blue eyes and blonde hair, Lori was always adored by her parents and her big brother Paul. The family was originally from New York State, but later moved south to the rural Alabama farm country near the town of Auburn when Lori was just 13 years old. As a country girl being raised with animals, Lori was an avid animal lover. According to her friends, Lori was absolutely beautiful. She loved spending time with friends, watching movies, riding her bicycle, and playing video games. In addition to all that fun, she was also very studious, and her family tried to support her as much as they could. After finishing high school, Lori enrolled in nearby Auburn University, where she majored in psychology with a minor in criminology. Her parents bought her a mobile home so that she could live off campus in a manicured trailer park that was popular with students. She was living alone with her beloved dog, Peanut, a Yorkshire Terrier. Her close bond with her family remained intact, with her mother calling every day to check up on her. In 2005, she graduated with honors from Auburn University. Soon after graduation, she took up a job in the East Alabama Mental Health Center while still living in the trailer park. She also made plans to go for her master's degree in psychology in the near future. Lori's family was proud of her achievements, unaware of any foreshadowing of evil that was looming over her head. On June 10, 2006, 24-year-old Lori had made plans for a girls' night at her best friend Lindsay Braun's house. They had plans to have a few drinks and watch a movie. Lori first met Lindsay in their junior year at Auburn University. Already impressed by Lori's sweet, charming, and outgoing personality, the two girls became friends. The bond only grew stronger when they both got a job at the same mental health facility after completing graduation. Around 6:30 p.m. on June 10th, Lori called Lindsay saying that she had to stop at the store, and then she'd head over to her house for the movie night. Unfortunately, she would never make it there. Lindsay grew worried when she did not hear from Lori again that night or the following day. She called Lori several times and left messages on her home answering machine, but she never heard back from her. When Lori did not show up at her workplace on Monday, June 12th, Lindsay's concerns skyrocketed. It was very unusual for Lori to miss work and not inform anyone. After another no-show at work on the following Tuesday, June 13th, Lindsay, along with another coworker, went to Lori's house to check on her. When they reached the trailer home, Lindsay could not find Lori anywhere. Upon entering, she found the door unlocked and the AC on, which was pretty surprising. She also observed that Lori's dog Peanut was inside his crate. He looked well-nourished and happy, as if someone was taking care of him. Amazingly, his crate was unsoiled, even though Lori had been missing for several days at that point. Lindsay felt that something was amiss, as it was unlike Lori to leave her beloved pet alone unattended. Lindsay remembered that Lori had placed 3 rugs on her kitchen floor as the dog refused to walk on the tile. These rugs were missing, along with the outside trash can, when Lindsay entered. Later that same day, June 13, 2006, Lori's mother, Arlene, got a call from her workplace regarding Lori missing work 2 days in a row. Arlene immediately tried to call her, but could not get a hold of her. Afraid for her daughter's well-being, Arlene immediately left for Auburn after alerting her husband Casey of their daughter's disappearance. Upon arrival, she entered Lori's trailer and found a disturbing scene. She noticed the door was slightly ajar and her bed was perfectly made, but there was no sign of Lori. Her car was also missing. With a closer look, she noticed Lori's kitchen rugs, a pillow from her couch, a Galileo thermometer, a green trash can that Lori put a rake and shovel in, and the phone cord for her landline were all gone. Alarm bells rang as Arlene instantly realized something was horribly wrong. She officially reported her daughter missing, while still hoping that she would show up eventually. As the initial investigation was launched and police scanned through Lori's trailer home, they could not find any significant evidence that could link a possible suspect. However, they noticed there were obvious signs of a struggle and scuff marks on the wall. There were discovered on Lori's bedsheet, and traces of blood were also found on the doorknob. A coat hanger and a single golden hoop earring were also found at the scene. Police would soon recover surveillance footage on June 10, 2006, showing Lori stopping at an Alabama Walmart. That was the last known sighting of Lori, and nobody had any clue what happened to her after that. A tip would, however, soon come in later that afternoon. Arlene got a phone call from one of Laurie's friends, 25-year-old Daryl Richard Ennis, who was commonly referred to as Rick. Rick told Arlene that he met Laurie the day she went missing, and he thought she might have gone off to make a drug deal. Laurie had met Rick Ennis at a bowling alley where he worked. She often hung out there when she was still a student. Arlene knew him because Laurie invited him to spend Christmas with Laurie's family in 2005. Laurie felt bad for him, having no family of his own. However, Arlene could not believe what Ennis was claiming, despite her daughter's close friendship with him. She did not believe that Laurie would ever be involved in drug dealing. She thought that he was simply lying through his teeth, but didn't have any clue as to why. Police were also given this information by Ennis himself, yet before they could act on it, a terrifying discovery was made. On June 14, 2006, 4 days after Laurie's disappearance, at approximately 4:40 a.m., her car was found fully ablaze on an impasse near the bowling alley where Rick had previously been employed. From that point on, the investigation shifted from a missing persons case to a possible homicide. According to investigators, the fire destroyed any traces of evidence that would have possibly been found inside the car. However, Laurie was not inside the vehicle at the time it was burnt. A hand-rolled cigarette was on the ground near the car. A gas can was also found close by in the woods. The incident horrified Laurie's family, and they were almost certain now that something very bad had happened to her. Investigating the information Ennis provided to Arlene was their only clue at the time. When Ennis was brought in for questioning, he repeated the same story he told Arlene, only adding more details this time. Ennis claimed that he and Laurie grew marijuana together. According to him, Laurie might have gone off to sell her share of the weed they grew together. He also added that Laurie could have been dealing with shady people. Police raided Laurie's trailer. However, even after a thorough search, the police were unable to find any evidence of Laurie dealing drugs. During the interview, investigators also took note of several scratches on Rick's hands and arms, which he claimed came from his dog. More concerning things came to light when investigators talked to Lindsay. As per Lindsay's account, she had heard Rick Ennis speaking in the background when she and Laurie last spoke on the phone the day she vanished. Since Ennis was known to be a friend of Laurie, Lindsay did not think much of it at the time. Lindsay claimed that when she texted Rick inquiring about Laurie's whereabouts, he said that she was fine when he left her. Lindsay also informed the investigators that before her disappearance, Laurie had told her that Rick had written a love letter to her. His feelings for her were not reciprocated. Lindsay also claimed that Laurie told her that she was not romantically attracted to Rick and was going to have a conversation about it with him. Later, investigators found out that Ennis told her friends about his letter and Laurie's rejection. When police re-interviewed him to confront him with the new information they collected from Lindsay, he admitted meeting her hours before her disappearance, but insisted that Laurie was perfectly fine and was preparing to go to the store when he left her house. However, investigators discovered several inconsistencies in his statement. Investigators began focusing on Rick Ennis as their prime suspect. Their suspicion only grew stronger after searching his car. Investigators found several items of interest, including a knife, some cleaning supplies, and handcuffs. To gather more evidence, investigators began digging through his past, but they were not expecting the twists they were going to be met with. Looking through the unimaginably dark past of Rick Ennis, investigators discovered that he had actually murdered his mother and stepfather when he was only 12 years of age. On March 3, 1993, just 10 months after their marriage, Ennis had beaten his mother, who was known as a sweet church-going lady, to death with a baseball bat after shooting her in the face in their trailer in North Montgomery, Alabama, where they lived. Ennis's stepfather, Eddie Joe Flowers, who was known as Elvis because of his sideburns and vibrant personality, was met with the same fate as his wife. After murdering his mother, Rick shot him in the face using a shotgun when Eddie came home from work. After the murder, Ennis drove the family car and crashed into a fence on the side of the highway. Alabama State Trooper John Clark stopped Ennis walking along the highway. When he asked him where his parents were, Ennis told him that he'd killed them. As Detective Clark searched the backpack the young boy was carrying, he found a kitchen knife and some ammunition for a 12-gauge shotgun, as well as for a .22 caliber. When asked why he killed his parents, the emotionless 12-year-old Ennis told the cops that he was mad that his parents planned to move. He said he didn't want to leave his school. For 2 days, investigators believed he lived with their bodies while continuing to go to school. He further confessed about his future plans to kill his 3 stepsisters, which further shocked the investigators at the time. Although his murders were nothing short of gruesome, due to his age, he could not be tried as an adult. As a minor at the time, he was sent to jail for 9 years for the double murder. After he was released, he moved to Auburn, where he then met Lori Slesinski. After Lori's disappearance, Rick Ennis was the prime suspect in the case. However, in spite of Ennis's past and loads of circumstantial evidence, it was impossible to charge Ennis for Lori's murder without Lori's body or any direct evidence. Ennis left Auburn just weeks after his interview with detectives and moved elsewhere, finally ending up in Huntsville, Alabama in 2007. By then, though, Lori's case had gone cold. After moving to Huntsville, he soon moved in with a roommate, Abram Sissons. Abram noticed that Ennis brought kitchen rugs with them, which he claimed were a gift from Lori. He also told Abram that he was in love with a woman in Auburn who disappeared without a trace, but did not mention her name. Abram found nothing unusual in these conversations until he learned about Ennis's dark past. He then asked Ennis to leave immediately. Abram later claimed that when he returned to his apartment, it was completely trashed. However, the police recovered the rugs, one of which tested positive for Ennis's blood. Abram also claimed later that he saw a Galileo thermometer in Ennis's room before he moved in with him, the same kind that was missing from Lori's home. Sadly, the police could still not link Ennis to Lori's murder at this time. As their prime suspect remained at large, the case remained unsolved while Lori's devastated family waited for answers. For years, this case had no updates. Then in 2016, after a decade, Mark Whitaker, a special agent of the Alabama State Bureau of Investigation, opened a cold case unit and started reinvestigating Lori's disappearance along with his team, which included his longtime partner, Agent J.W. Barnes. Lori's case was their first project, and they began revisiting the evidence, sending some of the items to forensic labs for testing, and conducting several interviews and re-interviews. After the re-examination of the evidence, Ennis naturally became his main suspect. Agent Mark was aware of Ennis's past, and his gut told him that Ennis had done something similar to Lori. But he had no idea as to how to prove his guilt without more evidence or a body. However, in an unexpected twist, Agent Whitaker's partner, Agent J.W. Barnes, found an important piece of evidence while looking through the files. He discovered a report in an envelope that had not been opened for 10 years. After Lori's disappearance in 2006, police collected evidence from the trailer, but no one followed up with it until the results came in. The results showed that semen found on Lori's bedsheet and blood on the interior side of the front door contained Rick Ennis's DNA. After organizing all the evidence, investigators built a strong case against Rick Ennis and were eventually able to get an indictment order in 2018. By this time, Ennis was happily engaged to a school librarian named Alana Atkinson and was living in Pilot, Virginia. There, he was working for a company that designed and built portable living structures called yurts. On August 6, 2018, on his 38th birthday, 12 years after Lori Slesinski went missing from Auburn, Rick Ennis was arrested by a task force of U.S. Marshals. While it came as a relief to Lori's family, Ennis's fiancée and co-workers were shocked by this turn of events. After being arrested on 2 counts of capital murder, his trial was postponed due to COVID-19. The trial finally began on April 1, 2022. While the prosecution presented all the evidence that suggested Ennis's involvement in the crime, including the cigarette butt and Lori's bedsheet containing his DNA, the defense argued that police could have taken the cigarette from Ennis's home and planted it at the crime scene. They also attacked Lori Slesinski's character by trying to portray her as a drug dealer. To explain how his DNA got on the bedsheet, Rick claimed that he had consensual sex with Lori before her disappearance, suggesting that they were still intimate despite Lori's rejection of his advances. However, his story did not seem very convincing, especially when 2 more witnesses came forward with jaw-dropping information. One of his former co-workers in Alabama, Jeremy Brooks, stated that on June 9, 2006, just one day prior to Lori's mysterious disappearance, he received a call from Ennis asking if he could bring him gas and if he could keep the gas tank. Jeremy rejected his request.
What did he say when he called you on the night?
He said he had run out of gas and he needed, was there any way that I could run him and get him some gas?
Later, after police found Lori's scorched car in a gas can, it matched the description of a gas can that was missing from the bowling alley where Ennis worked. Another of his former co-workers from South Carolina, Terry Booth, testified about the chilling experience she had with Ennis years prior. Terry remembered asking Ennis why he moved from Auburn. Ennis told him that he had to get rid of a body. Although he thought Ennis was just joking with him, the announcement of his arrest for Lori's murder proved otherwise. Although Rick Ennis continued to deny all allegations against him and maintained his innocence, jurors came up with a guilty verdict after 2 days of deliberation. He was facing the death penalty for the crime, but the DA agreed to take the death penalty off the table after consulting with Arlene. Arlene later said that she felt agreeing to a life without parole sentence for Rick Ennis would save her from years of potential appeal hearings, but would also ensure that Ennis would never be free. On April 14, 2022, he was sentenced to life without parole. He remains incarcerated in William E. Donaldson Correctional Facility in Bessemer, Alabama. For Arlene Slesinski, the outcome was bittersweet. With tears in her eyes, she shared that it meant she had to finally accept that Lori was never coming home, an incredible hope that a portion of her heart always clung to. 11-year-old Sally Horner was a smart, cheerful, and quiet girl. She was in a local five-and-dime store in 1948 and decided to steal a book on a dare. When she did this, however, she was stopped by a man who claimed to be an FBI agent and who said he was going to arrest her. What unfolded after this between her and this stranger was an extremely disturbing tale that extended for the next few years of her life. This is the story of a young life cut short, a young life full of potential that was taken away too soon. This is the disturbing case of Florence Sally Horner. The young, beautiful little girl you see here is Florence Sally Horner. She was born in Trenton, New Jersey on April 16, 1937, to her father Russell Horner and mother Ella Goff Horner. Sally also had a half-sister named Susan Swain, who was 11 years older than her. When Sally was still quite young, her father died, leaving her mother to take care of the family and be the sole breadwinner for the two girls. Ella Horner, Sally Horner, and Susan Swain continued to live together at 944 Linden Street in New Jersey. Sally attended an elementary school called Northeast Elementary School that was in the area. The year was 1948, and Sally was soon going to turn 11 years old. By this time, she had grown into a beautiful, bright, and cheerful little girl. At school, she was known to be very punctual and a good student. At the time, most girls her age wanted to join the girls' club that their school had, and this was something that Sally, too, yearned for. However, the girls who had formed the club told her that if she wanted to join, she needed to steal something from the local five-and-dime store as an initiation task. The thought of doing something like this made Sally hesitant, and she wondered if it was worth the risk. But later, she decided to go ahead with it since she had always dreamed of becoming one of the girls. Sally's birthday was fast approaching, and she'd finally turn 11 years old. However, little did she know that her life was soon going to take a turn for the worse, a turn that was so disturbing and dark that nobody could have seen it coming. During the early summertime in 1948, shortly after Sally's 11th birthday, Ella Horner decided to go on a cross-country trip. Ella took her daughter Sally along to accompany her on this journey. On their travels, they decided to stop at Atlantic City. During their time there, Sally managed to find her way into a local five-and-dime store on her own, without her mother's company. When she entered the store, she remembered the dare that the girls at the club had given her and realized that this was likely her best opportunity to steal something. Sally then decided to go ahead and steal a notebook. As she picked up a 5-cent notebook and shoved it into her bag, a middle-aged man grabbed her by the arm and told her that he was an FBI agent. He told Sally that she was under arrest for stealing from the store.
No real FBI agent would harass a young child in a store in this manner, so who was he really? The man's name was Frank LaSalle. He was not with the FBI or any other law enforcement agency. He wasn't even a security guard who worked at the store. So who was he? By the time Sally met Frank LaSalle, he was a 50-year-old convicted. Frank had been released on parole that very year, just 2 months before he met Sally at the store. These girls were between the ages of 12 and 14. Sally was also close to this age group when she met Frank, but of course, Sally didn't know this. When Sally heard the words, "You're under arrest," it terrified her. This was the first time she'd ever been in any sort of trouble, considering that she'd always been an obedient girl at school and a loving daughter to her mother. As a young child, she didn't know better and thought that she was really about to be arrested. The man then told her that he'd let her go as long as she reported back to him from time to time. If she didn't, he told her he'd place her into a reform school. Now, when Sally heard this, she felt that she had to agree to his rules. She felt like she couldn't tell her mother because she didn't want her to know about the crime she'd committed. Also, as a young child, it seemed to her that reporting from time to time was a much better option than telling her single mother she was going to prison. For the next 2 months after the incident in Atlantic City, Sally would report to Frank from time to time, who'd followed her and her mother back to New Jersey under the pretext of keeping an eye on her. As she was doing this, Frank was collecting information on her and slowly planning his next moves. Frank left for a while, but then stopped by to see Sally again in the middle of June of 1948, this time while she was walking home from Northeast School. At this time, Sally had just finished the 5th grade. When he met her, he had new instructions. These instructions demanded something that sounded terribly difficult to her. Frank wanted Sally to go back with him to Atlantic City, the same place where they'd met. This meant that she'd have to leave her family and go somewhere alone with this total stranger. Frank had a plan ready. He intended to pose as the father of Sally's classmate and invite her for a week-long vacation to Jersey Shore. Sally was hesitant to tell her mother about this at first, but she was more scared of the threat of going to jail, so she worked up her courage to do so. She went ahead and informed her mother that she'd been invited on a week-long vacation to Jersey Shore with a friend's family. Ella Horner, Sally's mother, thought that this was a wonderful opportunity for her daughter. She felt like her daughter was finally making some good friends, so when Sally asked her for permission, she agreed to let her go. On the day Sally was set to leave, she walked her a few blocks from their house at 944 Linden Street to the Camden Bus Depot. There, she noticed Sally interacting with a man who she thought was the father of Sally's friend. She said goodbye to Sally and told her to have a good time and then return home safely. However, little did she know that the man Sally was with wasn't someone who she should have trusted. Frank had already planned what he was going to do by the time Sally's whereabouts became a concern. This plan also got Sally off the radar while making it look like there was absolutely nothing wrong. On arriving in Atlantic City, Sally and her abductor, Frank, both posed as father and daughter. They had their names changed and started living a completely different life. Sally was given a new name, Florence Planet, while Frank LaSalle also became Frank Planet. They didn't stay in Atlantic City for long, and soon after, the two moved to Baltimore. Frank made every effort to make it appear as if Sally and him were a family. He sent her to the St. Anne's Catholic School near where they lived. While doing this, Frank never forgot to make Sally write letters to her mother. He supervised what she wrote to make sure that she never revealed anything about where they were or what was going on to her mother. After the first week, Ella was waiting for her daughter to come back from vacation, but instead, a letter arrived from Sally. In the first letter, Sally said that she'd enjoyed her week-long vacation and wanted to stay a little longer. From then on, 1 week stretched into 2, then 3, then 4. Finally, on July 31st, 1948, Ella received the last letter from Sally. In it, Sally told her mom, "I don't want to write anymore." On receiving this message, Ella immediately called the police, knowing that something must have gone wrong with her. By August 5th, 1948, the search had begun. At this time, both Frank and Sally had moved to Baltimore. Frank had sensed that the police would arrive in Atlantic City soon enough and decided to get out of there. Meanwhile, the Camden detectives who were investigating Sally's kidnapping arrived at 203 Pacific Avenue in Atlantic City, the return address on the first few of Sally's letters. However, it was too late by then, because both Sally and her abductor were long gone. As the case was progressing, new charges were now brought up against Frank, which made it impossible for them to stay in Baltimore. This made Frank decide to move to Dallas. Young Sally never thought she'd find herself in such a situation. The man who had kidnapped her kept telling her that he was an FBI agent on a secret assignment. During the day, she'd be sent to school and pose as the loving daughter of a single father, and by night, she was abused. The routine went on for weeks, which soon turned to months. In Dallas, Frank found himself a job as a mechanic. Through this, he was able to get some money, and it helped keep up the appearance that he and Sally were just a regular father and daughter. They stayed at a quiet, well-kept trailer park called the Dallas West Mobile Home Park on West Commerce. Here, Frank continued to send Sally to school. He enrolled her at Our Lady of Good Counsel, a Catholic school that was on South Marsalis at 9th Street. During this time, he tried his best to pose as a father to Sally in the eyes of the public. Some of the neighbors found Frank to be very aloof and standoffish, while the girl, Sally, was very pleasant and a typical 11-year-old living with her widowed father. She had a generous allowance for clothes and sweets. She'd go shopping, swimming, and to her neighbors' trailers for dinner. Everyone thought her father was providing for her quite well. Back in New Jersey, it had been 5 months since Sally was kidnapped. Her mother, Ella Horner, had not yet given up hope in searching for her daughter. Meanwhile, in December of 1948, back in Dallas, where Sally was living with her abductor, the routine remained. However, during the day, she'd often be seen doing what a typical 11-year-old would do. It was at this time that Ruth Janish and her family moved into the trailer next door to the Planettes. As time went by, Janish began to grow suspicious of the relationship between her neighbor and his daughter. She noticed certain things that made her have doubts that they were actually father and daughter. The fact that Frank never let Sally out of his sight except when she was at school. The fact that she never had any friends her own age. That she never went anywhere and just stayed with her father in the trailer. All these things made her wonder if Sally was in trouble. Sally, on the other hand, was continuously tortured until her body felt sore. One day, her condition got so bad that she had to have an appendectomy. Her surgery was done at what's now called the Scottish Rite Hospital for Children. After the surgery, she walked like a stiff old lady. Instead of getting better, she was getting even worse. Slowly, the neighbors noticed that Sally was not herself whenever her father, Frank, was home. Janish planned on getting some information. When she got her alone, she tried to ask Sally what was really going on between her and Frank, but Sally wouldn't say anything. Finally, Janish decided not to meddle with them. She had also decided to move to San Jose, California in search of work. By February 1950, Ruth Janish and her family had packed up and moved to San Jose, California. A few months went by, and Janish finally settled down there. She was still worrying about Sally and wanted to be sure the girl was all right. So she sent a letter to Frank LaSalle in Dallas, encouraging him to come west where there'd be more opportunity. In February 1950, this is what Frank and Sally did. Sally's health was getting worse in the meantime. It got so bad that eventually she admitted the truth to a classmate about the true nature of the relationship with the man claiming to be her father. The friend told her that the behavior was wrong and that she ought to stop. But it was too late. Before her friend could help her, Frank had taken her to San Jose, California. On arriving in San Jose in February of 1950, Frank and Sally met Janish again, and they began to settle themselves in their new surroundings. However, by now, Sally felt like she had enough of this life. The next month, on March 21st, 1950, she gathered all her courage and managed to get Janish to a private place, and finally she opened up to her. She told her that she'd been kidnapped and wanted to go home. Sally had nothing else on her mind but wanting to be with her mother and her sister back in New Jersey. Janish immediately assisted Sally in calling her family in Camden after receiving this information. By this time, Ella believed that her daughter had been lost, so when she got the call on March 21, 1950, Ella was overjoyed that her daughter was alive and wanted to come home. As soon as she got the news, the Camden County detectives and police force set off to bring Sally back home. The FBI recovered her from a trailer park in Southern California and arrested Frank. On March 31, 1950, Sally boarded a plane with a Camden County prosecutor en route to Philadelphia International Airport, where she'd be reunited with her mother, Ella, and her older sister, Susan. By this time, her older sister Susan had given birth to a baby girl during the time Sally was in captivity. Frank was arrested on March 22, 1950, in San Jose, California. Even when he was caught, Frank continued to claim that he was Sally's father. However, authorities in New Jersey had already confirmed that Horner's real father had passed away years ago. After evidence was found, Frank was tried, convicted, and sentenced to 30 to 35 years in prison under the Mann Act. Sally had finally been reunited with her loved ones. During the summertime, she went out with her family to Florence Township. She even tried to live like a normal child, but things didn't fall back into place as she thought they would. It took longer for her to find herself once again. And no one could blame her, because she was just an 11-year-old girl when she was kidnapped and held captive for 21 months. There were signs that she was struggling to readjust to normal life. For instance, she hardly made any close contact with the people around her. She also suffered psychological trauma because of her experience, but her family and the community continued to give her support. Though this was helpful on their part, Sally continued to struggle with her emotions. When Frank's sentencing was announced, Sally finally felt a sense of peace. She felt like she'd finally received justice. However, she continued to be indifferent to her surroundings. The memories of her abduction and abuse still ran fresh in her mind. But despite the terror and the isolation she'd experienced, she did find small moments of joy and hope. There were times when she remembered making friends with people she met along the way. One of her most cherished memories was attending school again. These little moments of joy made Sally a truly remarkable and brave girl because she managed to find the light in the darkness. However, just as inspiring as her efforts were, Sally had another tragedy befall her soon after. It had been 2 years since Sally returned home to Camden to live with her family. On August 18, 1952, she was on a trip to the shore near Woodbine, New Jersey. While returning home from her trip, her car crashed into a parked truck. She died in an instant. She was just 15 years old. As the Associated Press reported on August 20th, 1952, Florence Sally Horner, a 15-year-old Camden, New Jersey girl who spent 21 months as the captive of a middle-aged morals offender a few years ago, was killed in a highway accident when the car in which she was riding plowed into the rear of a parked truck. Not many people who knew Sally are alive today. Her niece, Diana Chiamingo, now 70, who was born in August 1948, 2 months into Sally's captivity, is one of the few still around. Chiamingo, who lives in Burlington, was 4 when Sally died and lived much of her life unaware that there was such a person as Sally whom she was related to. But even if the people who knew her personally are now few and far between, we hope that through this video, more will know the story of this brave girl and appreciate the courage and strength she displayed.
Two of my kids are dead. What do I gotta do? They dead. She left them dead in the house by themselves.
Oh, okay, ma'am. Where are you now?
I'm in my house. She left my door open. My baby boy, my oldest baby boy, is the only one that's here, only one that's alive. She left them in the house by themselves. She left them in here.
When a young mother of 4 called 911 on October 13, 2017, authorities were shocked to discover the tragedy that had unfolded in their modest Atlanta, Georgia apartment that Friday night. On closer inspection, though, the story didn't add up. Interviews with neighbors and family painted a disturbing picture, leading investigators back to square one. But what triggered such an act of cruelty, and who was really to blame for all of it in the end? Atlanta, the capital of Georgia, is the 8th largest metropolitan area in the U.S. It has a thriving hip-hop industry and was a major role player in both the Civil War and the 1960s civil rights movement. The city remains predominantly black, with a stark racial divide and poverty. Known as the city that rose from the ashes, most of the city was burned to the ground on the orders of General William T. Sherman in 1864 during the Civil War. However, the city rebuilt itself and claimed the phoenix as its city symbol. Atlanta does have its fair share of crime, but remains a tight-knit community full of music and culture. And it's here this heart-wrenching case unfolds. On Friday, October 13, 2017, a distressed mother of 4, 24-year-old Lamora Williams, called the police to report that she'd found 2 of her youngest children deceased in the kitchen of their apartment. Moments later, 911 dispatchers received a second call from a man named Jamil Penn Sr., who claimed to be the father of the 2 boys who were allegedly found lifeless in his ex-partner's apartment.
I just received a call from my child's mother that 2 of my youngest 2 dead babies, my sons, are dead in an apartment.
Okay, there's a lot of background noise. There what in an apartment, sir?
I just received a call that 2 of my kids are dead inside of an apartment.
In response to these 2 separate calls, police, firefighters, and ambulance services were dispatched to the scene and made a gruesome discovery. 2-year-old Jakarta Williams and 1-year-old Keontae Penn were discovered lifeless on the floor of the kitchen. They'd both suffered from severe injuries to their heads and were clearly deceased. What they discovered was unsettling, to say the least. Investigators wondered if it had been a simple accident or a case of neglect. They began by asking questions to both the neighbors and family members of Lamora Williams. Moments later, Jamil Sr. arrived at the scene and restated what he told 911 dispatchers on the call. According to the children's father, Jamil Penn Sr., Lamora called him and explained that both of the boys were deceased. She then ended the first call and switched to a video call. She turned the camera toward the scene of the incident, and Jamil knew instantly something was wrong. Jamil said it was like a real-life horror movie. He saw both his boys lifeless on the kitchen floor and called 911 immediately. The bodies of both boys were removed and taken to the coroner's office for an autopsy. The coroner's autopsy report made mention that both Keontae and Jakarta had been in the for a lengthy time. The statement read, "These thermal changes appear to be entirely from dry heat and changes from prolonged exposure to heat. It would require ample time to get to this degree." The coroner could not give a definitive cause of death, but ruled out blunt force trauma as there were no broken bones. Meanwhile, back at the crime scene, investigators were still questioning family, friends, and neighbors when they stumbled across several clues that painted a disturbing and twisted picture. Many of the statements made by those present pointed a finger back at Lamora herself. The first of these clues came from the 911 call she'd made. According to the call, she'd inquired several times whether she was going to be held responsible for the death of her children, even though she claimed she was not at home.
I understand that, but can you please help me? Like, can you please tell me, like, I don't want to get locked up because this is not my fault. I had just came home from work.
Investigators found it strange that she was concerned about being accused of murder rather than giving emergency response teams vital information to get to the crime scene. Another clue came from neighbors who said that Lamora's apartment had smelled of death for a few days. If the children had only been found that night, then that wouldn't have been possible. They also stated Lamora did not have a babysitter at any time. She often left the children alone at home while she went to work. But according to her 911 call, she alleged to have asked her cousin to babysit, but that cousin had disappeared by the time she returned to the apartment. However, there was more yet to be revealed, including the statement of Lamore's closest friend, Nisa Smith. Nisa was the first person that Lamore called that night. According to Nisa, Lamore had sounded distressed and told her that she couldn't do it anymore. Nisa told investigators that a month earlier, in September 2017, Lamore had quit her job because she could not cope with raising her children and maintaining a full-time job. Nisa told investigators that she tried to coax the truth out of Lamore during the call, as she was concerned for both her friend and the children. Lamore then allegedly revealed that both boys were deceased. Nisa urged Lamore to call the police and report the incident. Instead, she called the boy's father, Jamil, and showed him on the video call what had just happened. Police also said that the 3-year-old surviving child, Jamil Penn Jr., had allegedly witnessed the murder of both his siblings and repeatedly said that Mummy had hurt his brothers. This was also revealed by Jamil Sr.
He talks about his brothers, you know what I'm saying? He know what happened. He talks about it all the time.
Working with this information, investigators arrested Lamore Williams in the early hours of Saturday, October 14, 2017, for the murder of both her youngest sons. She was detained at the Fulton County Jail while further investigations were being made. Sergeant John Challey of the Atlanta Police Department said that they'd searched for the unnamed cousin who was allegedly watching the children, but found no one. He added that it soon became clear that she'd been withholding information. At this time, investigators do not believe the children's mother left them with a caregiver. Investigators have developed probable cause to charge the mother with 2 counts of murder, he said. Investigators also removed the stove from the apartment in order to further prove the manner of death, as the coroner's report was still inconclusive. But what had driven Lamore Williams to such cruelty? There's scant information available about Lamore Williams. What we do know is that she was born in 1983 and lived with both her parents and older sister Tabitha in Atlanta, Georgia. Her close family and friends often called her by her nickname, Red. According to her mother, Brenda, and sister Tabitha, Lamore had suffered with mental health issues from a young age, possibly even since birth. This was confirmed in an interview with Jamil Penn Sr., who said he knew Lamore's parents very well.
Know her mother and her father very well, so, they always told me that she had, mental illness, when she was younger since birth. I never really was like, okay.
Lamore's mother, Brenda, said they'd struggled with her all their life. She was a slow learner. I had to pull her out of school and do homeschooling. She'd do simple things like cutting my other daughter with a knife and her own doll's heads off. We only see this stuff in horror movies. I've been afraid since then, said Brenda. Tabitha Hollingsworth backed up her mother's statement, acknowledging that Lamore suffered with mental health issues that went undiagnosed for years. Despite all of Brenda's efforts to seek help, nothing worked in their favor. No one listened to her pleas. Teachers would say something was wrong, but the state said nothing was wrong. This is something the state didn't recognize. The whole state failed us, she said. When Lamore turned 18, she gave birth to her first child, a daughter named London Williams. However, the relationship with the baby's father did not work out, and Lamore returned to her parents' home. Despite this, Lamore and her ex-partner continued to co-parent in harmony along with his family, who assisted both financially and physically by having London over as often as possible to their home. It was soon after the end of this relationship that Lamore met Jamil Sr. According to Jamil Sr., they met through mutual friends and had just clicked instantly. They both wanted to experience an adventurous relationship, and Jamil Sr. described her as being full of fun and enjoying life. Signs of her depression were not initially noticeable. Jamil Sr. described himself as being more of the hothead and Lamore as the calm one in the relationship. Within 3 years of their relationship, Lamore gave birth to their first child together, a son named Jamil Penn Jr. Lamore and Jamil Sr. moved in with their parents and their baby boy as they saved towards starting their own life. But soon, tragedy struck. On April 20th, 2014, Jamil Sr. discovered the body of Lamora's father in his bed after he failed to show up for breakfast that morning. Reports suggest he'd suffered a heart attack sometime the night before. This seemed to be the catalyst for much of Lamora's mental health deterioration, as she was particularly close to her father and relied upon him as her pillar for strength. Family members agreed that, since the death of her father, Lamora had started to change drastically and became depressed. Jamil Sr. stood by Lamora, and they even tried for another child. Keontae was born soon after, followed by Jakarta. But this didn't solve the issues Lamora was facing. She developed a severe case of postpartum depression, exacerbated by having 3 babies in such close succession. Jamil Sr. and Lamora decided on a fresh start and moved out with their children to an apartment in Oakland City, a neighborhood in Atlanta. For a while, things seemed to be on the mend. However, within a year of Jakarta being born, their relationship had hit rock bottom. Jamil Sr. was frustrated in their relationship as Lamora sank further into depression, and so he decided to end their partnership. He did, however, maintain a close relationship with his boys. He visited them often and supported Lamora financially with raising the children. The breakup of the relationship put Lamora's mother on edge as she tried desperately to get the attention of child services. Brenda said that Lamora was just not right. She tried for months to get the attention of authorities, knowing something bad was going to happen if she was left alone with the kids.
I did tell DFACS everything because I wanted for them to either to give me the kids or get the kids out of her possession.
She even spoke to Jamil Sr., stating that she knew something bad was going to happen. She knew Lamora was going to do something to herself and/or the kids. Brenda tried to acquire custody of the children by begging officers to remove them to her care. She called officials daily, reporting Lamora's strange behavior, but nothing was done. She eventually turned to the Division of Family and Children Services, reporting her concern for Lamora's mental health and claimed that Lamora was neglecting the children and not feeding them. Lamora's sister, Tabitha, backed up her mother's statement, claiming that Lamora often left the kids alone at home. She had issues, and the fact that the state failed her, that's a problem. She routinely left her children home alone and had even attempted to harm herself, said Tabitha. Following the deaths of both boys, the Oakland City community came out in support of Jamil and his surviving child. A vigil was held in honor of both children, with a visibly distraught Jamil Sr. telling reporters that, after seeing what Lamora had done, he had lost his soul. At the vigil, Jamil's sister spoke openly about what her young nephew saw.
My nephew, while he was watching whatever was going on in this house, and he came and talked to me and told me exactly what was going on. That baby seen everything.
Jamil then told everyone present that his boys were his entire life and that they have now been ripped from him. A GoFundMe page was created by Jamil Sr. to help with paying for funeral costs and to assist with raising his surviving son. Moved by the enormity of the tragedy, funeral director Willie Watkins felt compelled to ensure both boys were given the send-off they deserved. He donated a plot at the Southview Cemetery, the oldest Black community cemetery, and secured a eulogy to be spoken by the great-nephew of the late Dr. Martin Luther King. Watkins emphasized that it was about the family and being there for them in their time of need. The boys were laid to rest on Saturday, October 21st, 2017, a week after their tragic discovery. The funeral service took place at West Hunter Street Baptist Church and was attended by many members of the community who came out to show their support. The pastor delivered a powerful sermon, encouraging the congregation to support the family. The boys' caskets were sealed, and Watkins arranged for the caskets to be wrapped in pictures of the boys and images of their favorite superheroes. Afterward, Jamil Sr. held on tightly to his surviving child as his boys were taken away on a carriage drawn by white horses. Watkins remained a pillar of support for Jamil and his remaining son. He offered them counsel through the difficult time. He'd spoken to little Jamil Jr. and explained that both his brothers were at peace and tried to help him process the traumatic events of that fateful day. He also explained to Jamil Jr. that one thing was for sure:
his brothers were in heaven. Jamil Sr. has since reached out with phone calls to Lamora, who is being held at the Fulton County Jail without bail. Jamil Sr. said that Lamora showed no emotion even when he asked her why she'd done such a thing. Her lack of remorse was disheartening, said Jamil Sr. As Jamil Sr. led the boys to rest and Lamora Williams sat in jail awaiting her next hearing, investigators worked at developing their reconstruction of events based on the new autopsy findings and witness statements from family and neighbors. The new autopsy did not find an exact cause of death. However, there were several burn marks on the bodies, indicating that the stove was used to harm the boys. It also included that most injuries were caused to both the boys' heads. Investigators believe that following her breakup with Jamil Sr., Lamora spiraled out of control, as backed up by both her mother's and sister's statements. She'd begun neglecting the children and placed them in harm's way by leaving them unattended while going to work and without any proper food to eat. Lamora, having been suspected of suffering from postpartum depression, began taking out her frustrations on the children. And combined with work stress and loneliness, she may have eventually lost interest in raising her children altogether. The statement provided by Nisa Smith painted a picture of a woman at her wit's end, as Lamora eventually quit her job in September 2017 to stay at home with the kids. This loss of independence, failure of not just one, but two relationships, and the depression of losing her father may have reached a fever pitch while she was trying to juggle raising 3 toddlers. Becoming overwhelmed, she may have just been looking for a way out by silencing her children once and for all. If police were to believe that Jamil Jr. witnessed his mother hurting his brothers, it was possible that Lamora may have used excessive force to control the boys, and in turn caused their deaths. If neighbor statements were in fact true, the boys may have been deceased since Thursday, October 12, 2017, any time from 12 p.m. that afternoon to the next evening of Friday, October 13, 2017, at around 11:30 p.m. before they were discovered. It was also possible that Lamora Williams had used the as a way to cover up the actual crime. The 911 call was made as a way to create a cover story, investigators believe, as not only did she call Nisa Smith and confess to the deaths of her sons, but she also called Jamil Sr. before placing the call to 911. Furthermore, she had the presence of mind to make it appear as if she had simply discovered her children, rather than committing the crime by first blaming an unnamed cousin for neglecting her children.
I'm in my house. She left my door open. My baby boy, my oldest baby boy, is the only one that's here, only one that's alive. She let them in the house by themselves. She left them in here.
In later interviews with investigators, she even blamed her sister for the children's demise. Investigators also said that the entire call and scene didn't add up, as she continuously asked the operator for reassurance.
I understand that, but can you please help me? Like, can you please tell me, like, I don't want to get locked up because this is not my fault. I had just came home from work.
Had she truly been away at work and only discovered the crime scene, she may not have been so concerned about her own guilt, but rather concerned for the lives of her children. In the minds of the investigators and of the prosecutors, Lamora was responsible. It was up to the grand jury to decide her fate. On February 2, 2018, a grand jury indicted Lamora Williams on various charges that included murder, making false statements, aggravated assault, concealing a death. The last charge was included after they heard that Lamora and Jamil Sr.'s 3-year-old son was in the apartment when both the siblings passed away. Lamora's mother Brenda had visited the Fulton County Jail but was denied visitation. However, she did make a request to authorities that Lamora be placed on 24-hour surveillance as she believed she posed a danger to herself. On May 30, 2018, Lamora appeared in court for a status hearing ahead of her trial, which was set to begin in January 2019. The judge upheld the sentencing and charges, to which Lamora pleaded not guilty. She'd once again return to prison and be kept under high surveillance. However, since that court appearance, there have been no new updates or developments in her case. Given her evaluation since being incarcerated,
there remains speculation that the court found her unfit to stand trial. It's widely believed that she may have been placed in a psychiatric facility to undergo treatment before being fit for a trial. Several reporters have allegedly attempted to discover her whereabouts and have not been able to find any records of Lamora on prison records or within the files of the Georgia Bureau of Criminal Investigation. Her records remain confidential. Looking back at the entire incident, Brenda Williams, Lamora's mother, was saddened but not surprised by what happened. "My daughter is a sick person, if she did what I think she did." Brenda stands firm that Lamora was heading down a road of destruction and that the failure of the state led to the demise of her grandsons. "I reported her to the district because I either wanted them to give me the kids or get the kids out of her possession, because at one time I thought she was just going nuts not feeding them," she said. Brenda has stated that she herself needs therapy after facing such an ordeal. When asked if Lamora was capable of such a crime against her children, Lamora's older sister Tabitha agreed that it was a probability. For Jamil, he's turned to prayer and sought therapy for himself and Jamil Jr. His only consolation is that both Keontae and Jakarta are together in a better place. As much as he wanted to see his sons grow up to become strong, independent men, he was glad that their suffering was now over. "I'm praying, and I'm glad that they don't have to suffer anymore," he said. He intends on being there at every turn to support his surviving son through the emotional turmoil he's bound to face as the years go by. Jamil Jr. can still remember what happened that evening as he recounts the story to his father daily. He describes everything, and when we talk about it more, he gets into full detail. He starts saying stuff that he's seen, said Jamil Sr. He's placed Jamil Jr. in therapy to help overcome the trauma he witnessed. He has a therapist because he needs to get that off his mind. "It will be off his mind in a couple of years with the right therapy and counseling," said Jamil. But it was still bothering him, as there are times Jamil Jr. asks his father about his brother. "It just broke me. He knows they're dead, but he still thinks that they're coming back," he said. He can't imagine what trauma his 3-year-old may be experiencing, as he himself is still haunted by the events of the night, and says he can still see the boys lying motionless on the kitchen floor every time he closes his eyes. Yet he refuses to let what happened to him make him a victim. Instead, he's using his loss to inspire others. "I want everyone to use my story as a helping hand. I lost my 2 young boys to violence, and I want to be the difference maker in someone else's life to prevent a child from being hurt," wrote Jamil Sr. on his GoFundMe page. Today's case has given us all food for thought as we look back at what could have been done to prevent such a tragedy. It's clear that more action needs to be taken to ensure the safety of our children. It's also important to note that government systems need to make mental health awareness a priority and address the issues in real time and not after a crime has been committed. Prevention is always better than the cure. These are the final haunting images of 29-year-old Jill Marr. As she made her way home in the early hours of September 22, 2012, fate would place her on a direct path to danger. Her husband Tom waited anxiously for her return, but as the minutes ticked by, hope slowly began to dwindle. Little did anyone know that on this night, a predator stalked the streets of Brunswick, Victoria, and his sights were set on Jill. But who was this man seen on CCTV talking to Jill? And could he provide investigators with answers as to Jill's whereabouts? In today's case, we return to the Golden Shores of Australia. It's an inner-city suburb of Melbourne, Australia, and is noted for its bohemian culture and strong art and music influence. The Sydney Road Street Party is held annually in late February as a prelude to the Brunswick Music Festival that attracts tourists from around the world. Brunswick is home to a large community of Italian and Greek immigrants who have added to the cultural diversity of the city. Due to the proximity of the University of Melbourne, Brunswick is home to a multitude of students who contribute to the energetic nightlife that's synonymous with the town. It's not unusual to see young people walking around, drifting from pub to pub as the night progresses. It was on a night similar to this that Jill Marr vanished off the streets of Brunswick. Born on October 30th, 1982, to parents Edith and George McKeon, Jill and her younger brother Michael spent much of their early childhood in Drogheda, Ireland. Jill was described as a bubbly and vivacious child who loved to entertain. Her parents also said that Jill had a very strong family bond with all of them. Eventually, the family relocated to Perth, Australia, where her father started a new job. While in Perth, Jill attended Bull Creek Primary School and Rossmoyne High School. In 1996, the middle of her high school career, Jill's family returned to Ireland. Jill completed her high schooling at the Drogheda Grammar School before enrolling at community college. In 2004, her parents returned to Perth, Australia, but Jill stayed back in Ireland. She then went on to graduate with a Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Dublin. While working at the student bars, she met Tom Meagher, to whom she was instantly attracted. The couple began a serious relationship and eventually married in July 2008. Jill is remembered fondly as the petite woman with a powerhouse personality. Jill and Tom eventually followed after her parents and settled in Melbourne, Australia. Her natural flair for entertainment and love for drama and the arts saw her begin her career at the Australian Broadcasting Company as a unit coordinator. She sometimes helped with on-air work at the 774 ABC Melbourne radio station. Tom and Jill decided to wait before starting a family, deciding instead to enjoy their married life together first. It was a good thing too, as Jill had been juggling married life, work life, and her parents after her father had recently suffered a stroke. She'd spent some time with her parents in the fall of 2012 before returning to Tom and work in early September 2012. After returning to work, a colleague celebrating a birthday invited Jill along for a night out. It was a typical thing for Jill to spend evenings with her friends from the office. It was on this very night that tragedy struck. Friday night, September 21st, 2012, Brunswick was alive with students and people looking for a place to unwind after a stressful work week. Jill and several of her colleagues from the broadcasting company met for drinks at the Brunswick Green Bar Hotel on Sydney Road. It was a popular place, and people constantly moved in and out of the pub. After a few drinks at the pub, Jill and her group moved on to another popular bar called Bar Etiquette, also on Sydney Road. At around 1:30 a.m. on Saturday morning, September 2012, Jill and her friends were ready to call it a night. Another male colleague offered to walk home with her, but Jill waved him off. She explained that her flat was only a 5-minute walk from the bar and that she'd be fine. Despite a night of drinking, Jill was still of sound mind and promised the group that she'd be safe. She knew the area well and had done this a few times before. As she made her way home to her husband Tom, she called her brother Michael to talk about their father. This was the last time anyone would ever hear from Jill. Tom Meagher woke abruptly at around 4 a.m. that morning to discover Jill was not in bed. This was out of character for Jill. If she was going to be out late, she would call and inform him. He checked his phone, but there was no call. He then called out for her before checking the apartment, believing she may have gotten out of bed. There was just no sign of Jill anywhere. Tom then tried calling her phone, but she didn't answer. He then contacted her friends, who all said that Jill had left the bar at around 1:30 a.m. that morning. Concerned, Tom dressed quickly and decided to go out and look for Jill himself. He walked up and down the streets between the bar and their flat. He searched every corner and alleyway, but couldn't find Jill or any trace of her. Tom then called the police to report Jill missing. Her friends, in the meantime, took to Twitter and began circulating images of Jill and information of her last whereabouts. Police quickly arrived at the flat Jill and Tom shared. They questioned him and collected evidence in order to rule him out as a suspect. It was normal police procedure, as Tom was Jill's spouse, and in crimes involving couples, the spouse is always the first suspect. Tom, however, was quickly ruled out as a suspect. For one, he seemed as shell-shocked as the colleagues who were last seen with Jill. Another factor was the lack of evidence of a struggle in the flat itself. While one team of police questioned those who last saw and spoke to Jill that night, another team scoured the streets and alleyways for any clues to Jill's whereabouts. Within hours of Jill's disappearance, a Facebook page was started to generate leads and tips on Jill's whereabouts. Flyers with Jill's face were handed out and posted up in public places, focusing on the area where she was last seen. On Monday, September 24, 2012, 2 days after Jill went missing, police discovered Jill's purse off an alleyway on Hope Street in Brunswick. The area was very close to Tom and Jill's flat. However, police were curious as to how the purse was so conveniently discovered. They'd searched the area thoroughly and had not found the purse in any of their previous sweeps of the area. On the same day, the homicide department officially took over the investigation. The discovery and reassignment of a new task force did not deter Tom's hopes that Jill would be found safe and alive. He went on to give interviews with local media, asking for Jill's safe return. But while Tom pleaded for Jill's safe return and police tried to find clues from the discovery of the purse on Hope Street, a new piece of evidence was about to push their investigation forward. A worker from the Duchess Boutique on Sydney Road discovered CCTV footage from the night of Jill's disappearance. On Tuesday, September 25, 2012, police received and reviewed the footage. Although grainy, they could make out a man wearing a blue hoodie pacing outside the shop between 1:30 a.m. and 1:42 a.m. The man walked by about 4 minutes before a grainy image of Jill appeared on the right side of the screen. From the footage, police deduced that the man engaged in conversation with Jill for a short while. It was also visible that Jill, for some reason, turned and showed him her phone before walking away. The man in the blue hoodie followed Jill until they went completely off camera. The disappearance of Jill Meagher was making national headlines around Australia, and police used this to their advantage. The CCTV footage was broadcast on all major news networks, and appeals were made to the public with help in identifying the man in the blue hoodie. Investigators returned to the apartment of Tom and Jill to recover more possible evidence. This included the couple's car that was taken in for forensic testing. Investigators then turned to technology for answers. They were able to procure the records of both Jill and Tom's cell phone records. Tom's phone had remained in the vicinity of Brunswick, while Jill's phone had pinged off several towers along the Tullamore Freeway near Moreland Road. It became clear to investigators that whomever had abducted Jill was traveling by car. Forensics on the car belonging to Tom and Jill did not provide any evidence that would link a dead body being transported. This ruled out Tom as a suspect officially. Now, investigators relied on the public for answers. In the course of the investigation, police received hundreds of tips. The Facebook page alone garnered over 100,000 likes and shares, and Twitter had become focused on finding Jill Meagher. But investigators were soon about to get their biggest lead yet. A tip from one of the police hotlines led investigators to the name of a man, 41-year-old Adrian Ernest Bailey. The biggest twist in the case was about to come. Investigators were about to uncover disturbing information about their new suspect. Bailey was no stranger to the criminal underworld. On September 27, 2012, at around 2:30 p.m. that afternoon, police arrived at the back room on Bud Street in Coburg, Melbourne. There they arrested Adrian Bailey and took him in for questioning. Prior to his arrest, investigators had done their homework and discovered Adrian's dark past. Born Adrian Ernest Edwards on July 14, 1971, he was the eldest of 5 siblings. Raised in Melbourne, Australia by parents Ernest and Christine Edwards, Adrian had a fairly normal childhood. At 18, Adrian married his high school girlfriend after she'd fallen pregnant in 1989. Adrian's life of crime started early on in their marriage. In June 1990, Adrian was accused of assaulting his sister's 16-year-old girlfriend. 2 months later, in August 1990, he attempted to assault another 17-year-old girl as she walked home from the bus stop. Adrian allegedly poked her in the eyes before ripping off her clothes and running away. In December 1990, he abducted a 16-year-old girl who was hitchhiking and drove her to a remote area with intent to assault her. Fortunately, his victim escaped and sought help from the strangers who disrupted the attack. Adrian was identified and arrested in January 1991. He pled guilty to all 3 offenses in June 1991 and served a minimum 3-year jail sentence. Upon his release in April 1993, Adrian enrolled in a culinary course. He completed an apprenticeship, qualifying as a pastry chef. He returned to his wife, but by 1995 they separated and he lost custody of both children. That same year, he began a new relationship and had another 2 children. Between 1995 and 2000, Adrian remained under the radar and changed his name from Edwards to Bailey by deed poll, a legal document that proves a person's change of name. Adrian seemed to have turned a new leaf. But a leopard never changes its spots. In 2002, Adrian was charged with attacking and assaulting 5 prostitutes between September 2000 and March 2001 in St. Kilda, Melbourne. He was sentenced to 11 years in prison with a non-parole period of 8 years. After 8 years, Adrian was released on parole on March 17, 2010. He returned to his second wife, but that too ended in divorce. He began another relationship in October of 2011, seemingly mending his criminal ways. He and his girlfriend moved into a back room in Budd Street in Coburg, Melbourne. In February 2012, Adrian's violent streak reared its head again. He allegedly got into a fight with a 20-year-old man and ended up breaking his jaw and leaving him unconscious. He appeared at the Geelong Magistrates Court and was sentenced to 3 months in prison for the attack. However, Adrian appealed the sentencing and was released from custody until a date could be set for the hearing. In the meantime, he began working as a laborer digging holes for piping. As Adrian Bailey sat in the interrogation room, investigators were quick to obtain a search warrant for his home on Budd Street. On paper, Adrian was the prime suspect for the crime, but until they could find physical evidence, the case was only circumstantial at best. Prior to his arrest, they were also able to obtain more CCTV footage detailing Adrian's movements over the course of the weekend following Jill's disappearance. Another warrant was given to investigators to obtain Adrian's cell phone records, and police uncovered a wealth of information. Over the course of 6 hours, Adrian denied any involvement with the disappearance of Jill Meagher. To investigators, he seemed very confident about his innocence, but as other teams started to discover the clues that linked him to the case, they chipped away at his defenses. The first thing investigators discovered was Jill's SIM card in Adrian's home. When confronted with this evidence, he denied any knowledge of how the card ended up in his home. Investigators questioning Adrian questioned him based on the various pieces of video footage obtained between September 22nd and September 24th, 2012. He played this off as being busy with daily chores and having no relevance to the case at hand. Investigators, however, believed these were the movements of a man trying to cover up his tracks. Adrian still did not break. The final piece of evidence brought in was the cell phone records. It showed that Adrian's cell phone and Jill's cell phone traveled the same route toward Gisborne, but that only Adrian's cell phone returned to Melbourne. Furthermore, a toll road camera on Moreland Road captured an image of Adrian's car and number plate, confirming his whereabouts on the night of Jill's disappearance. Not holding back, investigators painted Adrian a picture of how Jill was stalked and attacked before being abducted. It was a risk they were willing to take to break the confident facade of their suspect. Everything in that moment hinged on Adrian Bailey making a confession. Their tactic paid off. Adrian Bailey broke down and confessed to abducting and murdering Jill Meagher. By 10 p.m. on September 27, 2012, Adrian led investigators to the shallow grave on Black Hill Road and the remains of Jill Meagher. The coroner would later confirm that due to the lacerations and bruising on Jill's body, she'd been assaulted before being strangled to death. At 2 a.m. on September 28, 2012, a hearing was called to charge Adrian with the assault and murder of Jill Meagher. It lasted a mere 90 seconds before the judge ordered him to be held on remand to await trial. According to later reports, Adrian attempted to take his own life to avoid a trial while in custody that same night. Investigators pieced together the events of the night based on Adrian's confession and the CCTV footage they recovered. Jill Meagher had left her colleagues and decided to walk home at around 1:30 a.m. on Saturday, September 22, 2012. Adrian had been wandering around town, attempting to cool off after having a heated argument with his girlfriend. It was while walking along Sydney Road he spotted Jill and approached her just after 1:30 a.m. She'd been talking on her phone and did not notice that he'd made his way toward her. He lingered close behind until she ended the call before making a move to talk to her. They'd made idle chit-chat, and he continued to walk with her as she turned off onto Hope Street, just blocks from her apartment where her husband slept. He made several advances, but she rejected him. Adrian then made his move and tried to grab her and kiss her. Shocked, Jill reacted defensively by jerking back before slapping him hard. Already angry and frustrated after the fight with his girlfriend, he overpowered Jill and dragged her to the ground in the alleyway. Adrian then proceeded to assault Jill and tried to silence her screams by holding her mouth shut. Once he was done, she began screaming and threatened to call the police. As she began to dial, he reacted instinctively and grabbed her by the throat. He strangled her to death. After he realized what he'd done, he returned on foot to his home in Coburg and grabbed a shovel. He then returned to the alleyway at around 4:20 a.m. that same morning before the search for Jill could begin. He drove her body 40 minutes away to Gisborne in South Australia and buried it in a shallow grave on Black Hill Road. Over the next 2 days, Adrian attempted to get rid of the evidence by taking his car to the car wash and disposing of Jill's bag in the alleyway where he'd killed her. The reaction to the discovery of Jill Meagher's body was immense. An Australian flag, along with the ABC flag, were lowered to half-mast at the broadcaster's South Bank studios. On their website, a statement was released in memory of Jill and the massive impact she had on everyone who'd been in her life. The broadcaster also thanked the police for steadfast dedication to the case and their quick arrest of the suspect. The very same day, the Facebook page dedicated to finding Jill received over 600 messages of condolence. It's also believed that Jill's story was shared on over 12 million Twitter threads the same evening. Thousands of flower bouquets began to appear in various locations associated with the disappearance and murder of Jill Meagher. Police were forced to dismantle these tributes as they were causing a disruption with traffic flow and movement of people in the town. Numerous messages of condolences were also written in chalk on the footpath where Jill was murdered. A candlelight vigil was also held on the evening of September 28, 2012, at the Brunswick Baptist Church. Similarly, a memorial service was held at St. Oliver's Community College in Drogheda, Ireland, on the same evening. Thousands attended in memory of Jill, who was once part of their own family. On September 30, 2012, photographer Philip Werner organized a public march to honor Jill's life. It was attended by over 30,000 people who walked along Sydney Road in her memory. The march not only celebrated the life of Jill Meagher, but highlighted the issue of violence against women and the concerns of the public. Edith McKeon attended the march and publicly thanked everyone who took Jill into their hearts and showed their family's support during the difficult time. Jill's funeral took place at a private ceremony held at Melbourne's Faulkner Memorial Park and attended by invited guests only on October 4, 2012. The cemetery had been locked the entire day to avoid a media circus unfolding as the family said their final goodbyes. It was a celebration of her life, as many remembered the colorful personality of Jill. Jill was cremated as per the request of her family, and her ashes were taken back to Perth by her parents. The next day, on October 5, 2012, a formal memorial mass was held at St. Peter's Church in Drogheda, Ireland, after Jill's memorial and cremation. Another march was held on October 20, 2012, attended by 3,000 people as part of the Reclaim the Night movement. On October 21, 2012, one final memorial was held at St. Dominic's Park in Drogheda, Ireland. A tree was dedicated to the memory of Jill, and a poem written by Jill entitled Dedication to a Friend was read at the ceremony. Before Adrian Bailey could appear in court, he was tried in the court of public opinion. The extensive coverage of the case in the news and on social media added to the public outrage. Not only was the safety of women on the streets of Brunswick questioned, but the failure of the justice system in allowing violent parolees. Public comments made on several Facebook pages dedicated to the case showed open hostility towards Adrian Bailey. Victoria Police tried unsuccessfully to have these pages removed. Premier of Victoria, Ted Ballieu, suggested a law reform may be needed to avoid prejudice among the jury pool. During Adrian's pre-sentencing trial on June 11, 2013, impact statements were read to the court by those closest to Jill. Presiding Judge Jeffrey Nettle also ordered that a suppression order be lifted. This allowed Adrian Bailey's extensive history of charges to be released to the press. This only added to the rage burning in the hearts and minds of the public over their opinion of Adrian Bailey. Reforms were made to Victoria's parole laws, and by late June 2013, several new conditions came into play. These included heavy fines being imposed and police being allowed to take action against parolees who showed a threat. Dennis Napthine, who took over as Premier of Victoria, commented after the new laws were put in place in June 2013. He said that there was no doubt that the justice system failed Jill Meagher. Had changes been made sooner, the offender would have been back in jail and not on the streets. The actions taken were the minimum they could do to ensure nothing like what happened to Jill Meagher ever happened again. As the public fought the justice system, Adrian Bailey's trial began. Adrian intended to fight the charges leveled against him, but eventually pleaded guilty to the assaulted murder of Jill Meagher during his hearing on April 5, 2013. However, he pleaded not guilty to other charges dating back to the year 2000 at a second trial. On June 19, 2013, Adrian was sentenced to life imprisonment with a non-parole period of 35 years in front of a packed public gallery at the Victorian Supreme Court. He appealed his sentencing in September 2013, stating the minimum sentence was too long and denied that he took perverted pleasure in murdering Jill Meagher. On September 26, 2013, the appeal was dismissed after 10 minutes following arguments from both counsels. Following his sentencing for Jill Meagher's murder, Adrian Bailey was tried again in 3 separate trials beginning on July 13, 2014, and ending on March 12, 2015. Victims from several of his previous cases came forward given the extensive publicity behind the case. Adrian was charged at all 3 trials for against 2 sex workers and a Dutch backpacker that occurred before the murder of Jill Meagher. In May 2015, he was sentenced to another 18 years, and his non-parole period was extended to 43 years. On June 25, 2015, he lodged an appeal against the new sentencing. His team argued that his childhood trauma led to his criminal behavior. He was successful in having his non-parole period reduced to 40 years in June 2016. He's eligible for parole in 2055 at the age of 83. Given the high-profile murder case, Adrian was removed from the general prison population following an attack in 2017 by a fellow inmate. An inquest into Jill's death by the Victorian coroner was dropped, much to the relief of Jill's family. They were just grateful to have finally received closure from the case. Having spent too long mourning her loss, they now intended to celebrate her short life. Jill's husband, Tom Meagher, left Australia and returned to his hometown of Cabinteely, Ireland in August 2013. He returned briefly to Australia in November 2014 to promote the White Ribbon Movement, a campaign aimed at turning the tide against violence towards women. The charity has since been dissolved. In interviews that have happened since Jill's murder, Tom became an advocate of change by telling his side of the story and how losing Jill has changed his life forever. In an interview, he described what life was like without Jill. Tom also spoke about his opinion of the justice system and its failure to protect Jill. Following the public uproar over the failed justice system that led to Jill's murder, a woman named Juliet came forward in support of changing laws. She detailed her experience at the hands of Adrian Bailey.
He started to overpower me. He was a lot more aggressive. He was holding me down by the throat.
Juliet has vowed to join in the fight to stop a proposed gag order that would effectively silence the names of the women who were murdered by violent men. On what would have been their 10th wedding anniversary, Tom Meagher paid tribute to the life he would have shared with Jill. In his post on Facebook, he said that the scars he received following the news of her death are what connects her to him and gives him strength. It helped him survive as she provided him loving guidance. In his post, he also said that he often daydreamed about what they'd be doing in the years to come, but they never made it to 5. He concluded his post by thanking Jill for teaching him to love wholly and for the fire she lit in him and so many others during her short time on this earth. The case of Jill Meagher serves as a painful reminder that the innocent can fall prey to the predators that lurk among us. It also brings to light the fractured justice systems that have led to the deaths of so many victims.
Hit her with a stick. When I hit that girl the second time, and I was just in the, what the hell? There's a truck coming. There's a pickup truck right there. I mean, watching me. You know what I mean? I was like, you know, when she was still alive. I mean, she was moving and moaning. She was alive.
On October 11th, 1991, Linda Little, a waitress at a restaurant in Daytona Beach, Florida, suddenly vanished without a trace after getting off work. Her disappearance puzzled detectives for several years until the killer received spiritual enlightenment while incarcerated, leading to a chilling confession. So, what happened to Linda? Where did she go after leaving work that night? Was she followed? Or did an unfortunate twist of fate put her in the wrong place at the wrong time? Daytona Beach, which is located on the east coast of Florida's Panhandle. It's famous for its white sandy beaches and world-renowned international speedway, making it a go-to spot for racing enthusiasts. The city boasts of several resorts, attractions, and, of course, beautiful ocean views which attract millions of tourists yearly. Let's first go back to the beginning, though. Linda was born on the 29th of October, 1947, in North Carolina. Not much is known about her early life other than she grew up with 3 siblings in a close-knit family. Joy Little, Linda's younger sister, described her as someone with a lively spirit and whom people enjoyed being around. When Linda was around the age of 19, she gave birth to her first and only child, whom she named Mike Parrish. It's not clear who the father of Mike was or at what point Linda met him, but she eventually became a single mother and raised her son with the help of her family. In 1989, at the age of 41, Linda moved out of North Carolina and began living in Daytona Beach, Florida. Her apartment was a stone's throw away from the popular Broadway Bridge located in downtown Daytona, and she lived alone. To make ends meet in the new city, she took up a job as a waitress at the Chart House restaurant on South Beach Street. Everyone in her workplace loved her due to her positive energy. The pay she was getting at her new place of work wasn't really much, but it was enough to get by. Linda enjoyed biking and would often cycle to and from work, among other places. At the time, she owned a blue and rust-colored Murray touring bike, which she rode almost everywhere. At some point, she began a romantic relationship with a man from New Smyrna Beach, an area about 24 minutes' drive from Daytona Beach. Linda was at a good place in her life. She had her job, a boyfriend, family, and friends. Things were looking up and she seemed genuinely happy. Little did she know that her happy life would be snatched away from her all too soon. October 11th, 1991 made it about 2 years that Linda had been living in Daytona Beach,
Those 2 years had gone by in a flash, and it seemed to her like it had been less than that. On the morning of October 11th at around 1 a.m., she finished her shift at the Chart House restaurant and prepared to leave. Attending to hungry customers all night long had drained her, and she couldn't wait to be out of the place. She immediately changed into black stretch pants and a white shirt, said goodbye to her coworkers, and made her way out of the restaurant with a backpack. Linda was someone who was particular about her appearance and always had a change of clothes and makeup for after her shift, which she usually carried in a backpack. She got on her Murray touring bike and headed towards a bar located on Broadway. This bar was known as Matey's Brig Bar. She had plans to have a drink or two with some friends there before finally going home. When she got to the bar, she hopped off her bike and parked it in a spot she felt was safe. After doing this, she made her way inside the noisy bar and in no time spotted some of her friends sitting and chatting animatedly at a table. She went to meet them and joined in the conversation. Their talk soon centered on Linda's love life, and she was more than happy to tell her friends all about her new romance. She told them that she and her boyfriend had plans to go on a vacation that weekend. She brought out a map of Florida from the backpack she was carrying and began pointing out the places she and her boyfriend planned to visit. Linda's friends were excited for her. The one thing they didn't know was that Linda was not telling them the whole truth. She and her boyfriend were not going on any vacation. Although it was something they had both agreed on, much to Linda's disappointment, the boyfriend had called off the plan at the last minute because he wanted to go deep-sea fishing instead. It's not clear why Linda told her friends that the plan was still on. At around 2 a.m., Linda decided to take her leave. She said goodbye and made her way out of the bar. She got on her bike and pedaled in the direction of her house. She stopped at a 7-Eleven store that was located a short distance from her apartment to purchase some chocolate milk and a donut. After paying for the items, she got on her bike once again and rode off. That was the last time anyone would see her. The following day, Linda did not show up for her shift at work. It was unlike her to miss a day of work, and both her coworkers and employer found her absence strange. On rare occasions when she'd missed work in the past, she'd call in to inform her employer or get someone to cover her shift. Despite that, her coworkers at the Chart House restaurant went about their duties religiously, and the days soon went by. They expected that by the following day, she would report back to work. However, the following day, there was still no sign of Linda. Her coworkers became even more worried and feared that something was really amiss. One of them decided to call Linda's sister, Joy Little, to inform her about what was going on. "We all knew that something was wrong," Joy Little recalls when she was told about her sister's disappearance. A friend and coworker of Linda by the name of Barbara Sheridan finally reported her as missing 3 days after she had mysteriously disappeared. Meanwhile, Linda's coworkers and friends were not the only ones who had noticed her absence. The landlord of the apartment where she lived had also gotten worried when he did not see her for days. He too called the police and reported her missing. Daytona Beach detectives were suddenly faced with the task of finding the missing woman. The first place they went to was her apartment, believing that perhaps they could find some clue there that would give them an idea of what had happened to her. With the aid of the landlord, they entered Linda's apartment and began looking around. Everything was in order, and it did not seem as if the living space had been disturbed. Her bed looked as if it had not been slept in. Due to this, detectives began to suspect that she had not made it home after work on October 11th. At that point, they knew they had much serious work on their hands, but they were determined to get to the root of the matter. After the search of her apartment was completed, they began questioning people in the neighborhood as well as her coworkers and friends. It was while doing this that they discovered that she had been to the Matey's Brig Bar and then the 7-Eleven store after her shift ended, but nobody seemed to know where she'd gone after that. It was all so mysterious. During their investigation, they also questioned her boyfriend, since there was a likelihood that he would know something about the situation. But after interviewing him, they were still no closer to the truth. There was nothing that could be used to link him to Linda's disappearance. He told the detectives about the canceled vacation they'd wanted to go on and how it had been initially planned to celebrate their first anniversary. In addition to all this information, they also discovered that the boyfriend was a married man. When Linda's family found out about this, they were shocked. They believed that Linda had probably not known that the man was married before getting into a relationship with him. Police intensified their search and even employed the use of the K9 unit to aid in the search for Linda. Areas around where she was last seen were thoroughly combed through. They even began searching bodies of water, but all of their efforts proved to be futile. There was no sign of Linda or the bike she had been seen riding. It was as if she had just vanished into thin air. Detectives knew that something bad had happened to her, but there was no evidence available that could link her disappearance to foul play. "There's no telling what happened. We had nothing to go on," said Daytona Beach Police Deputy Chief Steve Barras. Linda's family also asked for the public's help in locating her. A $5,000 reward was offered for information about her whereabouts. In addition to this, they printed and distributed 3,500 missing person flyers. She was described as having brownish red hair, blue eyes, and a height of 5 feet 11 inches. Her weight was listed as 150 to 180 pounds, and a description of the clothes she was last seen wearing was also given. Some of these flyers were given to truck drivers to distribute throughout the country. Billboards with the same information were also put up in strategic locations within the city. As a last resort, Linda's family even turned to a self-proclaimed psychic to help find her. The following year after Linda went missing, her father died. The family was left to suddenly deal with the loss of another family member, which was no doubt devastating. In 1996, Linda's family received a phone call that was both shocking and mysterious. The man who called claimed that he had met Linda in North Carolina. When asked for his name, the man refused to provide this, and he immediately hung up. The man was never heard from again, and to date, no one knows who he was. In 2011, 20 years after Linda went missing, her family were interviewed by the local media. In an interview with the Daytona Beach News Journal, they revealed that they had not given up the search for her, but remained hopeful that she would one day be found. "I've never grieved for her," Joy Little said at the time. "I've worked on her behalf because that's what I feel I'm supposed to do. I'm trying to get to the bottom of questions that have gone unanswered," she added. In 2016, the case was handed over to a new set of detectives in the Daytona Police Department, but regardless of how they looked at it, nothing made any sense. The evidence available was just not enough to make any tangible progress, and the detectives were left frustrated. The case would remain dormant for 4 more years until early January 2020, when something unexpected happened. The Daytona Beach Police Department was contacted by an inspector from the Tomoka Correctional Institution, also located in Daytona Beach. The inspector contacted them about an inmate who claimed to have information about an unsolved murder. The inmate in question was a 51-year-old man by the name of Michael Shane Townsend, who was serving a life sentence for the 2007 murder of a Titusville woman named Sherry Carmento. Townsend and Sherry had been childhood friends who had reconnected after he got out of prison in late 2006. He had been in prison back in 1994 on a long string of charges which included robbery, grand theft, and burglary. After his release, Sherry allowed him to stay with her family for a few days. During his stay, he would end up beating her to death with a metal fence post and a hammer. He then dragged her body to the laundry room where he concealed her body under a pile of clothes. After this, he fled the scene in her vehicle. He eventually sold it to a group of people for an undisclosed amount. It did not take long for Sherry's body to be discovered by her boyfriend. Michael was soon found and arrested. During the interrogation, he admitted to killing Sherry. He revealed that she and Sherry had been intimate, and he believed that she might have knowingly given him AIDS. This, he said, was the reason why he had killed her. However, when an autopsy was conducted on Sherry's body, it was revealed that she did not have the disease. When detectives learned of these details, they were instantly curious to find out what he knew about the unsolved murder of Linda Little, which he had contacted them about. An interview was immediately set up, and Townsend sat down to talk to detectives from the Daytona Beach Police Department. During the interview, he confessed that he was the one who killed Linda back in 1991. Detectives couldn't believe their ears. To make sure that he wasn't mistaking Linda for someone else, they showed him a picture of her. He confirmed that she was the woman he remembered killing, saying, "No doubt about it. No doubt. According to his statement, he'd been living in Orlando but decided to travel to Daytona Beach to celebrate his birthday. He had arrived in the city on October 10, 1991, and had met Linda the following day at a resort hotel bar that was located at 701 South Atlantic Avenue in Daytona Beach. Unfortunately, it just appears it was a random meeting, and unfortunately, on the wrong day at the wrong time, Linda just met the wrong person. Detective Sergeant Dave Donardi with the Daytona Beach Police Department said. After having a few drinks, they left the club in Michael's car. While driving, he suggested to Linda that they should take a shower for some reason, and she had gotten very upset. According to Townsend, she then freaked out and began to yell and scream at him. He, meanwhile, was growing increasingly angry at all the noise she was making, and when he could not bear it anymore, he hit her hard across the face with the back of his hand. Afterwards, he proceeded to strangle her to death. When he realized that he'd killed her, he immediately thought of his next step. He drove to Camden County in the state of Georgia, and there he dumped her body behind a movable waste container. Detectives were amazed by all the details he was able to provide. They knew then that the case was finally solved. In addition to killing Linda, Michael also told detectives he had killed 2 women in Memphis, Tennessee. After the confession, he revealed that the reason why he had chosen to finally come out and tell the truth was because he had found God in prison. Michael also claimed that his predisposition to violence was because he had been sexually abused by his stepfather and some family friends when he was a child. Daytona Beach Police Chief Jakari Young stated, he blames his mother and other women in his life for not protecting him as a child, and as a result, he developed a hatred for women. When Linda's family were informed about the progress that had been made in the case, they were relieved by the news and grateful that Michael came forward to admit to the crime. Speaking at a news conference, Linda's sister, Wanda Hinson, said, "I know this is crazy. I really want to thank Townsend for letting the family know what happened. I've been praying for closure, and God's good. God worked through him for him to have confessed to this. I've already forgiven Townsend. I refuse to live in fear, hate, and anger. It doesn't help me. It doesn't hurt anybody else except me," she added. In addition to this, she also hoped other violent offenders would see his story and be prompted to admit their wrongdoings so that other families could have closure as well. In December 2022, Michael pleaded guilty to the first-degree murder of Linda during a hearing at the Volusia County Courthouse in DeLand. Since he entered a guilty plea, prosecutors decided not to seek the death penalty against him. He was, however, slammed with another life sentence. In a press conference after this, 7th Circuit State Attorney R.J. Larissa had the following to say, "The defendant is a confessed serial killer. It's gratifying to solve a cold case such as this. I hope the plea brings peace to the family during the Christmas holidays." Detectives have tried searching for Linda's remains in the area where Michael revealed that he dumped her body several years back, but they haven't had any luck. Through the dedication of detectives, the sustained hope of Linda's family, as well as the confession of the killer, Linda's case was finally solved. But what exactly happened to Linda's body remains a mystery. Let us know your thoughts in the comment section. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Until next time, stay safe